So Spider Webb, what a character. So I worked with him for about a year, and he just tossed me the keys to the place and be like, all right, Johnny, I'm going fishing, and you just tell anybody comes in here, just tell them you're me and take the money.
So you took over his shop?
I took over his shop with his permission. The most psychedelic experience of my life is being sober under the 12 steps of all these 12-step programs, because...
So you basically witnessed a suicide and a homicide at the same time.
Suicide, murder. And then 2 weeks later, my cousin, who was like my big brother, took his life right in front of me. Time in Mexico.
I'm all about unabashed transparency.
But not too much. Not too transparent.
We are in an undisclosed location in the bamboo forests of the Hollywood Hills. I'm sitting with legend, tattoo artist, author, recovering human being, psychedelic explorer, the great Jonathan Shaw. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you.
I want you to hold the mic closer to your mouth. I want to hear everything beautifully, robustly.
You got it.
And Jonathan was coming to Manhattan. It's a great story, actually. A Dopey listener who loves you wrote me, you got to check out this guy, Jonathan Shaw.
Louis.
And he was at the thing. You know what I did to Louis, though? Last night, Louis said, can I come to your interview?
Yeah, no,
and I said, no.
Good. I'm glad you did, because I didn't have the balls to,
I don't like
to impose that on anybody, so I'm glad it was you, because I love Louis. Louis is an amazing being. But, an interview, it's kind of intimate, and, it's, you don't want to have, no matter how, it can be distracting, I guess.
He is, he's also a very, very major Dopey fan, so I want to give a huge shout out to Louis.
Louis is a big fucking presence, man. I love fucking Louis. He's a smart guy, and he's the one that actually introduced us in a roundabout kind of way. Completely
introduced us. And then
you got to get him on. Actually, I told him last night, because we went out to dinner after the thing, and I told him last night, I said, you got to be on this podcast. And he was like, oh, shucks. And I was like, no, man, you got stories. And he does.
I'm sure he has the goods.
Yeah.
He looked like he has the goods.
He can throw down. So, yeah, you got to have Louis on here.
And Jonathan was coming to New York, and I was in Los Angeles, and Jonathan called me out of the blue while I'm cruising through the Hollywood Hills, and he says, David, are you ever going to be in Los Angeles? Because I'm not coming to New York. And I said, dude, I'm here now. We're doing our show tomorrow. Can you come? He says, yes. And now here we are recording in Los Angeles.
Well, dude, there's backstory to all of this. But I got to tell you, yesterday, I was in ceremony with Ayahuasca church that I work with for almost 20 years on a regular basis. And so I was in ceremony all day yesterday. It was the day when we were doing our bi-monthly works, and it was a very strong healing work, and there was a lot of people there, and we're holding this work. So I came straight from the ceremony, like it ended earlier than usual, thank God, and I got on the motorcycle and tore across town, straight from the ceremony to your Dopey-thon.
Dopeywood. And
so I get there, and what is the theme that they're talking about through this whole event?
Garbage dump of an event, yes.
They were talking about ayahuasca. Some of them were saying like, oh yeah, I did ayahuasca and I saw God, and others were like, oh, I saw the devil, and other ones like, I shit my pants, and there was a lot of misconceptions floating around. But there was also people that actually have experienced the medicine, and that's part of my journey, big time. That's part of my journey in recovery.
And I want to go down the ayahuasca rabbit hole, but I guess first question is, when you do the ayahuasca ceremonies, are you taking the ayahuasca?
Of course.
So yesterday you took it?
Oh, yeah.
So before Dopeywood, you took ayahuasca?
Yes.
Tell me, how was yesterday? Tell me about it.
How was what?
How was it?
How was what?
The ceremony.
Well, the ceremony is, it's intense, as always. But, I've done this literally probably thousands of times. I mean, I'm like, kind of a regular. It's kind of like keep coming back kind of deal. It's, some people, it's one and done, and they get what they need, and off they go into their best life. Other people, like they say in AA, some people are sicker than others. And so I've been following this path ever since I was first introduced to the plant medicine, and it's been part of my journey. It's not my journey, it's part of my journey. It's a big big part of my journey. And
Your journey was shocking to me because all I knew about you was that you were a legendary tattoo artist.
you don't know the half of it when it comes to shocking, but we can't.
What I didn't know, and it might be annoying for me to lead this, is I didn't know that your father was Artie Shaw.
Well, it's interesting because they used some voiceover. They had me reading voiceover as to narration of the documentary. And in that voiceover...
Actually, before you say another word, the documentary is called Scab Vendor. It's based on a book that Jonathan wrote called Scab Vendor.
Scab Vendor, Confessions of a Tattoo Artist.
And it's an incredible documentary. You guys need to check it out.
Thank
you. And what were you about to say? The voiceovers.
And the voiceover, they wanted me to... The directors had me, read certain passages from my books, which are what inspired the movie. And there was one where... It was like I said something along the lines, it's written down in the book, but I read it for the movie, and it says something along the line, like, all my life, I never told anybody who my father was.
Yeah.
It's like I was ashamed of it or something. I don't know. Maybe it was just hard for me to admit to myself that I even had a father, one that didn't give two shits about me. And that was, so up until I started getting sober 24 years ago, I'd really denied the whole concept of having a father because my father was either absent or, in the few brief encounters we had, very condescending and abusive. Now I've come to understand why he was like that. He was like that to sort of assuage his own guilt for, he left my mother because my mother was batshit crazy, and he was also, involved in that, being a sex and love addict that married
seven divorces,
eight divorces, some of the most glamorous women in the world, Lana Turner, Ava Gardner, Billie Holiday. He didn't marry Billie, but he was involved. Judy Garland. I mean, it goes on and on.
Hey, could you explain to the Dopey Nation if Artie Shaw was in the rock and roll era, who would Artie Shaw be compared to?
He'd be a confluence of Elvis, Michael Jackson, and Mick Jagger. I mean, he was that dude.
He was also a virtuoso clarinetist, right?
He was also a genius as far as his playing. Nobody's ever, taken that instrument to the level that he took it, and as a composer and just as a fucking genius. And like most geniuses, in my experience, he was a tortured soul, and a lot of this healing process that we do in alcoholic or addiction recovery, it sort of involves, as opening the wounds for examination, inventory and all that kind of stuff, and that's when the deep dive begins. And it's kind of like spiritual, emotional, mental surgery without anesthesia. That's why it's so hard for most people to get sober. That's why most alcoholics, and I'm paraphrasing something from the AA literature, but most alcoholics would rather die an ass-bleeding death in the gutter than submit to
God.
That surgery, that spiritual rebirth. It's not fucking easy,
How old were you when he left, and was he ever there?
No, he was never there. He was never there, right up to the day he died. He was there sometimes physically, because when I got sober, I was living in Brazil, and I got sober, and I was like, I got to go and start some kind of amends process with the people that made me, and my mother was a hope-to-die alcoholic and addict, and my father was this, crazy, narcissistic, sociopathic sex and love addict. So I came to them newly sober with maybe a year and a half, of abstinence, crazier than a fucking shithouse rat. And I wanted to know their stories. So, I wanted to, be present at the twilight of their life. And it was
and I'm sure part of you wanted to make peace.
Well, peace. That's what we're all looking for here, because, it's been a tumultuous life. So I came and got with these people, and my mother, God rest her soul, sweet soul, very sick, very afflicted, but a sweet woman who loved me as best she could. And my father, he just had to deny my existence on every level. And when I spent time with him, it was hard for him. It was hard for me. It was what Robert Williams, my friend, the painter, who's in the movie, called a very unfortunate relationship.
Absolutely, and I'm sure it informed a lot of your journey in general.
It still does.
Of course.
Because epigenetics and all that. I mean,
That clip though is in the film is so heartbreaking because he is unable to show you any love at all.
Unable.
And you show him love, and he is
begrudgingly.
Well, he's deadened to your attempt at love.
It was an assault
and
against
it's brutal.
His denial of any participation in the failure of this whole deal, this father-son deal,
It seemed, though, just from that very short clip, that he was incapable of love in general.
Well, that's what a sex and love addict kind of does, and I carry that gene too. I mean, I've written books about that shit. This book here is like one of the darkest, deepest delving into the sex and love addict world, of addiction and craziness, and it's a dark book.
Is it a novel?
It's a novel.
Awesome.
It's a book that would make fucking Bukowski cringe in shame. It's that dark.
When I was watching the movie, I was sitting with my friend. I'm staying at my friend's house in North Hollywood, and there's a lot of Artie Shaw music in the movie.
Ooh,
and
yeah.
it's very emotional music. It's very beautiful, emotional music. And I said to him, I wonder how Jonathan feels when he walks into a room and Artie Shaw happens to be playing.
I feel fine. I mean,
there's not a thing.
No, not at all. I mean, through the work I did with these books and through a lot of healing work that I've done in the 12 steps and in the ayahuasca journeys and other spiritual kind of healing protocols, I've dealt with it to the point where it doesn't disturb me consciously anymore. But here's an interesting thing. I was traveling around. I've been on tour tattooing, going all over the country, all over the world, visiting different tattoo shops the last couple of years. And then I went back and was working in Brazil. Then I came up here and then toured all over the country. Then I wound up in Mexico City and then was traveling around Mexico doing this tattoo gig. And I was loving it. I was having a great time meeting all these great people, running around like a rock star without a band. Good times. I come back to LA. I've got 10 days to pack my bags and then I'm going to Brazil for the winter. I got crippled. My back went out. Never happened like that, and suddenly I was literally paralyzed in the most excruciating physical pain I've ever had in my life. And I've been in pain. I got a high tolerance for pain, but this was like debilitating. And I was crippled. I was laid up there, and I couldn't move. And I was screaming and crying in pain for like a month and a half. And I was going to my ayahuasca church where there's a lot of healers and there's a lot of people that are into psychic spiritual, emotional healing, inner child stuff, all this kind of thing. And they started guiding me in the direction of looking at the mind-body connection and the unconscious mind-body connection. And I came to realize in that horrible, crippling pain that, oh shit, there's wounds that I thought I dealt with that are surfacing for healing. And I don't know whether to shit or go blind with this shit. It was, amazing. But then I started, for the first time in my sober life, really meditating. Because up until then, my meditation was through writing. It was through the, ayahuasca works. It was through, conscious contact with God on a sort of, like, foot on the ground level, but never going into the quantum realm through actual stillness and meditation. I got ants in my pants. I could never sit still, sober or not, like stark raving sober.
So what were you doing for your meditation practice?
So I started working with meditation, breathing, and some guided meditations. But, I got to a place where I was like starting to get all these downloads like, oh, I said in one of my books, if it ain't one thing, it's the mother. And if it ain't the mother, it's the father. Wounds. And Carl Jung, who's like, God bless Carl Jung said, God enters through the wound. So it was time to dig a little deeper, and it still is. And, suddenly I realized all these harms and hurts that come my way in life where I'm tempted to feel like a victim because somebody betrayed me or somebody ripped me off or somebody disappointed me, and I want to point the finger and go, you motherfucker. What really is going on is I'm attracting that through some frequency of my existence, and by attracting that, there's something in me that needs to be resolved. And so I start digging deeper and deeper into this. Well, my father is manifesting that abuse, that meanness towards me. It's reproducing itself through people, places, and events in my life now. And it's like, am I going to be, with all these years sober, trying to follow a sober path in recovery, am I going to be the guy that starts throwing shit at the mirror because I got a zit on my nose? It's not the mirror, it's the zit. And the zit is like we say in 12-step recovery, it's an inside job, So I got to put back the focus on myself. There's wounds there.
Absolutely.
And I'm not a victim. I'm creating my reality through whatever unconscious shit needs to be brought up and looked at. And, it's dirty work, man. Recovering is dirty fucking hard work.
And it's the psychic pain manifesting in your back. It's like that John Sarno business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dr. John Sarno, the mind-body connection.
Did you watch The Sopranos?
Of course.
Do you remember the scene?
I knew a lot of them fucking people.
Do you remember the scene
in real life
in The Sopranos where fucking Junior is demented upstairs and Tony's taking care of Junior and he's cooking him pasta and he puts on the radio and Artie Shaw is playing.
I don't remember
He's
that.
cooking the pasta. Junior's crazy upstairs and Junior yells, "Who there?" And Tony looks up and he goes, "It's Artie Shaw."
No fucking way.
And then Junior comes down with a pistol and he goes, "Malanga," and he shoots Tony.
Whoa!
Yeah,
I don't remember
I'll
that.
send you a clip.
Oh, you got to send me that.
Because it's the ghost of Artie Shaw, and it's this generational trauma in there, and it really,
Dude,
yeah.
I got stories about the ghost of Artie Shaw. This is one I've never told, at least not publicly, because I wanted to write it in my next book, but here goes. So I'm about 3 years sober, and I'm in Los Angeles. I just moved up from Brazil, where I'd, gotten, a lot of my early sobriety, and, I came up here to face the music, my parents. And I don't know if I was seeing Artie at the time or what, but I was up here in LA, and I lived in this fucking penthouse in Hollywood, and I was going through the torments of the damned, early sobriety, and it was tough. And I'm loneliness and all the shit that bubbles to the surface when we stop getting our medication, the heroin, the liquor, everything. Suddenly I'm having to feel everything raw. And I'm laying up in this fucking horrible place all alone, feeling so much pain, psychic pain of early recovery, and I'm starting to delve into these stories. I want to write these books about the whole fucking, the root of all this weirdness. And I'm laying there one morning, I wake up at like 5 a.m, and my tooth is impacted, and I'm in the most horrible pain, and I'm crying with pain, and I'm like, fuck. So I call this guy that I know who's a dentist in Beverly Hills, and I'm like, Najee, it's like 6 a.m. now, and I can't take it anymore. I call him, and he's like, I'm like, my tooth, I'm dying. And he's like, oh, come to my office, meet me there at 7, I'll be there. So I get to the office. Now this is after my father died. He'd passed away when I was in Brazil. And so my friend, the dentist, tells me to come to his office. I go to the office, and he looks at my tooth, and he's like, oh, fuck, man, I can't handle this. I'm not a dental surgeon. I'm going to send you to my colleague around the corner. He's a top dental surgeon. He's going to have to yank that tooth and do some kind of surgery because you're in bad shape. So I was like, yeah, but I didn't have any money. I was like, I don't have any money. I can't see some fucking dental surgeon. I got no insurance. He's like, don't worry. I'll tell him who your father is, and I'll tell him about you. And then he wrote all these books. He wrote this first book, Narcissa, and he'll take care of you. You can pay him later. And I was like, this is an emergency. So thank you, man. So I go over there, get on the bike, ride over there. I go into this guy's office, and he comes out of his, consulting room, and he walks right up to the front desk. He goes, you're Jonathan Shaw. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, Najee just called. You're Artie Shaw's son. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, that's a coincidence. I just bought your father's house. My father died. He left everything to some lawyer who stole all the money. I got nothing, not a pair of underwear. Anyway, so I looked at him and I was like, you bought my father's house? My father lived out in the ass end of like fucking Ventura County in some little anonymous neighborhood up in the hills. Nobody, he was a hermit. And I spent years in that house, like basically interviewing him, you know, to know these stories so I could at least know where I came from. And he was very begrudging, but he downloaded a lot of information into me, and I spent a lot of time in that house.
Well, I think that's very significant in itself.
Well, check this out. So the guy says he bought my father's house, and I said, you live in my father's house? And he was like, oh, no, I bought it at auction, and I flipped it to a client. Oh, by the way, she's having a birthday party tonight. You want to go? And I'm like, universe, the chances of this taking place right now are about 1 in 15 gazillion. I gotta say yes. So he fixes my tooth, he stitches it up. We get in his fucking car and we drive out to the ass end of this fucking anonymous neighborhood out in the middle of nowhere, and we pull up to that house. Now we get to the house and knock on the door, and this woman answers the door, and she's got one eye going this way, another eye going that way. She's drunk as a fucking fiddler's bitch. She's completely...
That's two really good phrases so far. Shitter go blind and drunk as a fiddler's bitch.
Well, welcome to my world.
Remind me to delve into those later.
I got a million of them. So we get in there, and she's drunk. She's on every kind of pill. You can just tell she's like,
done.
A crooked human being,
sure.
Just cooked.
Lubricated.
She's cooked. Yeah, she's toasty. So, and as soon as she lays eyes on me, she goes, "You're his son." And I was like, "Huh?" And she's like, "You got to get him out of here. We can't sleep at night. The whole house shakes. We can hear footsteps all night long. It's like it's hell. He's a restless ghost. You got to get him out of here." And I'm like, this isn't happening. So I walk in the fucking house. Now, this guy has gutted, the dentist when he flipped the house, he gutted the whole house of all the tore down walls, rearranged everything, and then sold it. Yet, somehow, everything was set up the way he had it, Artie had it. In other words, the table was where his table used to be.
As though Artie had made some suggestions to the dentist's psyche.
And here's the crazy part. In this weird corner, there's like this easy chair. It wasn't his easy chair because all his shit got dumped or sold at auction or whatever, but the whole place had been rearranged. But yet there's an easy chair in the same corner where he sat for years in an easy chair reading books all day long because he was that kind of guy. And I looked and I saw this easy chair in the same corner as his old easy chair. And I says to the lady, I said, and there was all these blankets piled up on the chair. And I was like, tell me about that chair there. Does anybody ever sit in it? Because there's blankets there. And she was like, oh, no, nobody can go near that chair. You can't sit in that chair. That's why we use it to pile stuff up on. And I was like, what do you mean? And she says, if you even go close to that chair, it gets really cold and you get goosebumps and it's creepy over there. And I'm like, holy fuck, he's here. And then...
Did you feel his presence in the house?
I didn't, but I got from this... that's the reason the universe sent me there, was to rescue this fucking restless ghost that's trapped in this material place with a crazy woman, because his whole thing was crazy women.
Right.
He was fascinated with crazy women. He married crazy women. My mother, everybody, they were all crazy because his mother was crazy, and I learned all the stories from him.
And his father had abandoned him the
exactly.
way he abandoned you.
Exactly. So... And he's trapped in this fucking restless ghost without a body, and he can't move from that house because he's so unconscious and so materialistic when he died that he stayed in that prison with that crazy woman tormenting him with horrible music, the kind of music that was
What was she listening to?
Listening to like pop, Beyonce, Madonna, just the kind of stuff that my father would just
die to hear.
Cringe in revulsion to hear this shit.
Yeah.
And the music's blasting, and she's drunk, and then her daughter comes running out of the kitchen. This is really good. Her daughter comes running out of the kitchen with a plate of fucking like hot dogs and hamburgers that have caught fire on the stove, and she comes running out and she's saying, "Mommy, the meat is burning." the meat is burning. His physical existence was like burning in hell or something, and it was like that. And she was like, "You got to get him out of here." And I'm like, "Well, And so we split. And within a few months of that, I went back to Brazil. I got initiated into, working with ayahuasca, which is the spirit molecule. And I came back to LA, and I looked around until I could find the proper setting to work with people that are very experienced. There's a lot of fake shamans out there, Joe Shaman, this and that. They're doing whatever. But, I got hooked up with people that have a lineage going back to Brazil, and, it's a very traditional ayahuasca church here in Los Angeles. And guess where they were located? Within miles of my father's house. And I started doing works there. I started working with the plant medicine healing protocols in this setting that just happened to be not real far from where my father had lived and died.
And when you returned to the house and the lady, was she?
I never went back.
You never.
No,
So
I didn't need to.
Do you think he was released from there?
Yes, but that was through the work that I did on myself.
There's so many. I have so many questions, and I don't know where to start. I want to start with. I want to get back to your first drug use, but I'm going to start here instead. I think I've heard DMT described as the spirit molecule.
Yes. Well,
is it the same thing?
Well, DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. I mean, I could go into a whole thing.
Give us a little bit.
Well, ayahuasca is it's a plant medicine that is composed of basically two plants. One is a root and the other is a leaf.
What's the root called?
The root is called jagubi.
Okay.
And the leaf is called ahainha.
Okay.
So these two work together.
Which is the yahe?
The yahe is just
Another name for ayahuasca.
It's just an indigenous Spanish indigenous name for ayahuasca. There's many names for.
So where Burroughs and Ginsberg writes the yahe letters, it was ayahuasca.
It was ayahuasca.
And they called it the spirit molecule.
Well, different parts of South America, they call it yahe. They call it lots of different things depending on the indigenous origins, the tribes, whatever. But it's the same basic medicine.
Okay, then I want to get back to your kid. You grew up in L.A., right?
I did.
And when's the first time you get high?
Oh shit! I don't know. Probably 12. I mean, it's a typical story. It's very predictable. I mean, we're all addicts, and we start pretty early. As soon as we can find something to relieve the existential angst of our miserable existence without it, we find something and we're like, oh, great, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I feel good.
However, you grew up in Los Angeles in the mid to late 60s.
Yes.
Which is a very special time and place to become a drug addict.
Oh, yeah.
And you came up in Laurel Canyon, in Jim Morrison's house, and Frank Zappa's house.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about all that?
I can't tell you too much. The reason I refuse to talk too much.
How dare you refuse to talk too much?
The reason I won't talk too much about it is because I want you to read the fucking books.
No. We need to get the juice. I need the spirit molecule of you.
The juice. So
I put the Jew in juice.
Yeah, well, mazel tov.
Thank you.
So, with the, I grew up in this thing. I mean, the reason the books...
I promise you, Jonathan.
I know you will.
I will, and we will return, and we'll do it all again.
The reason the books are important is because I did a very deep dive into the origins of my life, which is, I was gifted or cursed, however you want to look at it, with a very cinematic confluence of circumstances, which turned out to be this incarnation that I live in my life, in air quotes. And so in that, I grew up in the, home of my mother, my crazy, beautiful, tortured soul of an alcoholic mother. And, there was people around that home, Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe, Tony Curtis.
They were just in and out.
In and out, cocktail parties all the time, and all these famous people. I was a kid. I was 5-6 years old, and all these people suck. They're drinking, and nobody loves me. But I grew up in the the bosom of Hollywood royalty in a very abusive, violent, crazy, alcoholic home that on the outside looked like what everybody aspires to.
Perfection.
Ooh, you know, it's all glitter and glamour, and you know, under the surface of that, it was a fucking snake pit of addiction and dysfunction and violence and
you endured violence.
craziness. Oh, I watched people very close to me in my family of origin commit suicide in front of me, you know, as a very young kid. I mean, I watched suicide. I watched homicide take place in that family. So that's a long story. That's why the books. But we share in a general way what it used to be like.
Listen, we're not here just hanging out. We're making a fucking podcast. You can't just gloss over suicide.
But we'll be here till midnight.
No. We'll jump around. Give me one snapshot. What homicide did you see?
My mother's sister, Constance Dowling, she was also a movie star in Italy, and then she came to the States and wound up marrying a very well-off, horrible man who was a big Hollywood TV producer, very mediocre human being, but she married him for his money because she didn't want to be broke in Italy where she was happy, so she came to the States and married this Hungarian film producer who was a schlock merchant, and she married him for his money and had 3 kids that looked just like him. And when she was approaching her middle age, I guess she hated her life. She was alcoholic like everybody in my family, and she decided one night to just take herself out. And she took a bunch of pills, and my mother and I raced over there because she called my mother to say goodbye and take care of the kids. So we raced over there in the middle of the night. It was Halloween night, very creepy. We race over to this dark house in the middle of the night. Everybody's asleep, and she's up in there with an overdose of pills and vodka or whatever. We break down the door. I break down the door, get my mother up in there. My mother's calling for the ambulance. Her husband comes in and he's, no, don't call the ambulance. We don't want a scandal. She does this all the time. It'll be fine. And my mother's like, she's not fucking breathing. And she's dying. And I wrote about this graphically in the book. But anyway, at some point, the husband, the producer...
You don't feel compromised right now, do you? Do you feel like I've compromised you? Because I hope not.
No, don't worry about it.
Okay, good.
Fuck, man.
Good.
It is what it is, you
Good.
know?
Good.
But, the husband goes into, the bathroom. He pulls out this big old fucking syringe and fills it with what eventually killed her.
What was it?
Probably barbiturates. He said, this'll bring her around. And he fucking shot her up with this stuff, and she died.
So you basically witnessed a suicide and a homicide at the same time.
Suicide, murder. And then 2 weeks later, my cousin, who was like my big brother, took his life right in front of me.
What happened there?
He drank ant poison, cyanide.
How old was he?
16.
Oh my God.
I was 15.
And how much are you drowning your trauma in addiction at that point?
All the way. I mean, I don't want to know any of this shit, man. You know, I'm growing up. I mean, and that was just the cherry on top, because prior to that, I'd watch my mother, try to suicide herself with blood and stuff and ambulances, and I saw her try to murder her second husband, who was kind of like the stepfather that I liked, and she tried to murder him.
How?
Well, she tried to murder my father too. She actually shot my father with a gun, but she missed, and then my father beat the shit out of her, and then that was the end of that.
How old were you? What year was it when you were 15?
God, I don't know. I was born in 53, so do the
68.
math. Yeah, something like that.
15 years old, 1968, Los Angeles, son of Artie Shaw. What the fuck is that like? You didn't tell people?
It's not all glamour.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of glamour there. You didn't tell people?
Not in my conception, no. I grew up in a fucking battlefield.
Right.
But
when you fled, right? When you fled the home and you went out.
I went to the streets when I was 15, 16, found a group of, other traumatically
gifted long hairs.
Yeah, they're very good. So, yeah, I went on that that magic carpet ride, sex, drugs, rock and roll in the streets of Hollywood throughout the 60s into the early 70s, overdoses. I ran into a friend of yours when I was having lunch with Jerry Stahl right after the meeting today. I
Who's
ran
that?
into. I was sitting in this place next to a motel where they have a place called Swingers, where a lot of recovery people go for lunch. And me and Jerry and Zoe are sitting there having lunch. And this guy comes out of the motel that's attached to that place, and he comes up and he's like, "Hey, weren't you at Dopey last night?" And I was like, "Yeah, who are you?" I didn't recognize him. It turned out it was the guy who sang
Needle and the Damage Done. Adam David, yeah.
Well, so we got to talking, and I told him, the Needle and the Damage Done, there's a chapter about that in my book, because when I was a teenager, me and a couple of guys from my crew, we roadied for Neil Young for a season, just stagehand kind of stuff.
With Buffalo Springfield or with Crosby,
No, it was
Stills,
after
and Nash?
that. It was Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And we roadied for some big concerts with those guys. And I knew Neil Young, like peripherally. We were his, flunkies, but teenage flunkies, and we were all dope fiends. And this one kid, Bruce Berry, who was the brother, he was whatever. He was related to Jan Berry of Jan and Dean.
Right.
Anyway, Bruce Berry was the guy who overdosed and died, and he's the one that Neil wrote that song about. And then he wrote even another song. He said Bruce Berry was a working man. Well, Bruce was part of our crew, and he overdosed and died. He was just one of many. There's so many, and I've written about them because, it's important that they should be remembered.
Absolutely. Half of our show is
and
remembering.
prayed for. There's even a thing at the end of my book where I was like, a lot of these characters, are composite characters, but some of them are real people, and many of them are real people who are alive today, and some of them aren't with us anymore. And if and I just beseech the reader to pray for their eternal souls if you have any kind of higher power you're on speaking terms with, because that's the whole purpose of me telling these stories, is to it's an amends process, man. It's the biggest amends there is.
Well, our community's lost a ton of people, and my partner who started the show,
I know
and
the
we've
stories.
all lost a ton of people. So I appreciate that very much. Now, you said you guys were teenage dope fiends, roadieing for Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
Doing a lot more than that.
When
we were breaking into doctors' offices. We were doing all kinds of crazy
this
shit.
show is called Dopey, Drugs, Addiction, and Dumb Shit. So when's the first time you do heroin? Do you remember?
16.
Really?
But before that, I was probably snorting it when I was 15. I don't know, 14. I don't know.
Where's it coming from?
Where's heroin coming from?
For a 14-year-old here, like what? How did you stumble
It's on
onto
the scene, man. It's like everywhere.
Do you remember where you got it the first time?
No, I don't.
Were you a stoner at first?
Oh yeah, yeah. There was weed, there was booze, then there was pills, then there was lines of coke here and there, then there was this, then there was that, then it was just like this fucking smorgasbord of just sex, drugs, and rock and roll, man. It was that kind of life. We were everywhere. Dude, I was running with the fucking Manson family when I was 16.
What does that mean exactly?
Huh?
What does it mean that you were running with the Manson family? Paint us the picture.
Well, they were just on the scene. They were everywhere. We were all everywhere. It was a very small...
In the film, you said Charlie winks at you.
Yeah, Charlie winks at me. Well, Charlie was a very charismatic, cool dude, I thought. And
Danny Trejo?
I do.
In Danny's book, he talks about being in prison
Yeah.
with Charlie Manson, and Charlie Manson famously would hypnotize people, and Trejo had Manson hypnotize him that he was high on heroin.
Wow. Did it work?
I think it worked.
I think it might have worked.
So what I want to hear a bit about the scene out here in the 60s and what it is to be a budding drug addict at such a young age.
Well, all I could say is Quentin Tarantino got it all wrong.
Really?
Yeah, he wasn't there. I don't think he's as old as we are, as I am, or my crew.
That's like fan fiction.
Yeah, it was...
I didn't like it the first time I saw it, but the second time I saw it, I liked it.
I think he got a lot of it wrong, I was there. I lived this fucking life, but then maybe I got it wrong. Look at that crazy bird, man.
It's a robin.
Yeah, no, they're everywhere.
Beautiful.
I got a fucking hummingbird came right up and scared me the other day, right up to my ear while I was swimming up there. And I got out of the swimming pool, and I'm drying off, and I hear this, and I'm like, whoa, fucking helicopter, and I jumped, and it was a hummingbird. They're everywhere,
Can you give us a good drug story of your formative years?
There's so many.
Just give us one.
Okay. I come home. I'm still living with my mother. Maybe I was 14. And I was out on the streets, all the time. I only came home to change clothes or try to steal some money out of her purse, And I come home, it's like 3 in the morning. The house is all dark. I'm trying to sneak in because it's cold and I need a jacket. And I'm tripping balls on LSD. And I come sneaking into the house, and there's ants crawling up the side of the wall. And I can hear these ants like the fucking armies marching off to war, and everything's like intense. And I come creeping into the house, and I open the door, and it goes, and it sounds like fucking bombs are dropping, and I'm like, my heart's pounding. I don't want to get busted, And I come creeping into the house, and I'm stealthy as a cat, and I'm trying to sneak up to my room and just get the hell out of there. And I'm tripping balls, man. And suddenly I hear this voice, and it's like my mother, and she's like, Jono, is that you? And I look, and she's sitting in the living room with a little reading light on with a book, and she's wearing this long gown, and she looks like a queen sitting on the throne. And I'm like, oh shit, So I'm like, okay, maintain, be cool. So I'm like, how are you? She says, how are you, darling? And I'm like, I'm fine. And I'm trying not to make eye contact with her because she's starting to shapeshift into a fucking dragon.
Right.
And I'm like trying to be cool. It's just the acid, man. But now she's like shooting flames out her mouth, and I'm like, oh shit. Things like that just became a regular occurrence. That I did so much acid that's what really made me want to, like consciousness, mind expanding drugs like acid and psilocybin and mushrooms and all that kind of thing was too much. And so I wanted to go the other way. I'm trying to escape my traumas and reality. I just want out of there. So this shit is exacerbating my inner demons, all this mind expanding acid and stuff. I took so much acid, it was
it definitely informs your artwork though, doesn't it?
It informs everything, but that had to go because I needed relief, from the bondage of self, which acid was just exacerbating to the nth degree. So I'm like, dude, get me out of here. So I became a big fan of anything that was going the other way.
So what did you fall for first?
Alcohol, pills, barbiturates,
like Seconal and all that
all
stuff.
All that, yeah. Red Devils, all 2 and all.
Those great '60s drugs.
Quaaludes. Oh fuck yeah! Anything that would get me, kind of numb.
Right.
So I became a big fan of any depressant, and heroin is like the king daddy of all depressants. So opiates. Anything that's going to expand my consciousness or extend my awareness of being in a body plagued with hellish visions. So yeah, heroin became like the go-to, and alcohol. It was alcohol, heroin, pills of a downer sort of nature. So yeah.
With heroin, did you catch a habit when you were young?
Yeah. Oh, I was strung out like a fucking lab rat.
How
man.
old?
Well, by the time I was 18, I was so fucking strung out, it was like, flatline.
How did you maintain it?
Oh, we would sell drugs to weekend warriors. We would sell beat bags to, other kids that we hoped never to see again. We eventually started breaking into doctors' offices in Beverly Hills and stealing their shit. Then we had script doctors, too. Back in the day, we had script doctors. I wrote about all these script doctors. There was a long list of them. One of them was Elvis's doctor.
What was his name? The doctor?
I don't remember, but I have it in the book.
He's the one with the pink... the
pink Cadillacs.
The pink Cadillacs. Dr. Nick.
Dr. Nick. I went to see Dr. Nick. He gave me,
How was Dr. Nick?
Do
do you ever watch The Simpsons?
No, sometimes.
Because there's a Dr. Nick on The Simpsons, and I wonder if they based him on the Elvis's Dr. Nick.
Well, the Elvis doctor, he was only good for 1 or 2 visits, and then he cut us off. But then I went back there in the dead of night and robbed his office. And
What'd you get?
Got a bunch of Demerols, and I think we might have stole a prescription pad, because back then, you could pass off, bogus scripts. But then we found Dr. Harry Rose, who ran a pain clinic in Venice, and he was actually in that song by the Stones where it's like, I was standing in line with Mr. Jimmy.
Yes, I do.
And boy, did he look pretty ill.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Jimmy was Jimmy Miller, who was one of
the producer.
Yeah, he was one of the Stones producers who we were kind of interacting with back in the day. Because one of my girlfriends was Ellen Janoff. She was the daughter of Arthur Janoff, who was the Primal Scream doctor.
Yeah, John Lennon.
John Lennon's doctor.
Yeah.
We used to hang out and listen to John Lennon screaming in the fucking den,
Did you ever get to meet him?
Yeah.
What was he like?
Well, just in passing. No, I mean, he was coming from
You're like, hey, John, would you?
He was coming from a clinical, situation, and we're up there fucking shooting heroin. Anyway.
Did he get into Primal Scream before or after he got into heroin? Maybe both.
I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
I don't know. But at the time, Ellen, who was my girlfriend, she was also the girlfriend of one of my best friends, and she was also the sort of concubine of Marshall Chess, who was the manager of the Rolling Stones while they were recording up here in the Hollywood Hills. So we were hanging out with the Stones as these, gutter rat teenagers, and we were doing like drug runs for, Keith Richards and Jimmy Miller, and Jimmy Miller would be in line at Dr. Harvey Rose's office at 7 a.m. in Venice to get, prescriptions for Dilaudid, Quaaludes. So we'd get all these scripts, we'd get all this stuff, and then we'd go cash in the scripts, and we had to go all around Southern California to all these different pharmacies until we could actually get all this stuff, and then we'd sell the stuff we didn't want. We'd get scripts for fucking, like pharmaceutical meth, whatever they called that stuff back then, and we'd sell that because we didn't want it, and then we'd keep the stuff we wanted.
Just basically amphetamines, the straight
amphetamines.
Straight
We'd sell the amphetamines, and we'd keep the the Dilaudid and the Quaaludes.
Okay, I have a stupid and annoying question. As you're interacting with the Stones, and the Stones are like crazy music people, do they know you're Artie Shaw?
No, nobody knows.
They would have fucking lost their minds.
Nobody knew. I actually ran into Mick Jagger about 6-8 months ago at a party, and I told him, we were talking for a minute, and I told him that I sort of had known him back, a million years ago when I was a teenager, and he was like, oh, that's interesting, whatever. And then I said, yeah, and I mentioned to him who my father was, and, he was not impressed, and neither was I. So
interesting. Very interesting.
He was like, oh, yeah, he's the jazz guy, right? And I was like, yeah.
I bet Keith would have been interested, though.
Keith wasn't at the party. I don't know. I think he might still be, incapacitated to some degree. I don't know. He didn't look real great when we saw him. But whatever, we're old.
And how do you keep up? How long do you keep the habit going?
Well, that's the whole story. I mean, of the movie kind of skims over. That's the deeper story that's in the books, but the movie skims over it, to a point where cut to the chase. So I'm, 18, 19 years old, strung out like a fucking lab rat in Hollywood, and all my friends are dying of overdoses, and I had this moment of some kind of clarity where I said, I'm going to die if I stay here. And I didn't know how to, I didn't know anything about recovery or anything. I was a kid. This was the early 70s, man. So the best thing I could think of was just get the hell out of here, So I kicked dope cold turkey in a dirty little rooming house room in Hollywood.
By yourself?
By myself.
Wow.
Kick dope.
No nothing?
No nothing. Well, yeah, cheap wine and whatever pills I could find.
Weed, whatever.
Whatever I could find. But so I kicked cold turkey, as I had done several times in the past, because that's what we do when we run out of money and, run out of resources. You kick and reduce your habit, and then you go back and you can get high cheaper. Whatever. So I kicked the last time cold turkey bad. as soon as I was able to fucking stand and sort of walk across the room, I packed an overnight bag, limped down to the fucking freeway entrance, stuck out my thumb, and didn't have any money, didn't have any destination, didn't know where, I just stuck out my thumb, and I ended up in Mexico. And I hoboed around Mexico with no money for years.
For years?
Yeah.
And that was when you were reading Bukowski?
No, I'd known Bukowski before I left L.A. I'd known Bukowski. I'd read...
You'd known him personally?
Oh, yeah.
How did you know him?
I was writing as a teenager. I was writing all kinds of random shit, and I wound up getting some of my stuff published in a version of the L.A. Free Press, which was the weekly paper, underground paper, where Bukowski had a regular column called Notes of a Dirty Old Man. So I was being published in the same birdcage liner as my fucking hero, because I loved Bukowski's writing, and that was all I knew of it. He wasn't well known at the time. He just had this column in this sort of, birdcage liner of a, throwaway Hollywood magazine or newspaper thing. So I was like, damn, I've read stories about him, like, having people come over to his house and, sit up drinking and talking shit. So I'm going to go over there. And I found out where he lived. And I went there and knocked on the window. And, that's in the movie. And, that was our first encounter. And, we got drunk together and ended up, like, in a sort of drunken punch-up in his living room, and then we kept going back, We became kind of friends, and he was a big inspiration to me, and he was like, yeah, you fucking, little shit, you need to get the fuck out of here and go get a life before you'll ever be able to write anything decent. And somehow he planted a seed, because when I couldn't take it anymore here, I wound up sticking my thumb out, and I went and traveled all over the world without any money. All over Mexico, got work on a ship in Mexico and shipped out to Brazil, and then did the same thing there, and whatever.
Had you been an artist, like a visual artist as a kid?
I'd aspired to be.
Because you stumble into this incredible subculture of tattooing in that experience.
Yeah, well, that's all. I came into tattooing through the lifestyle more than... Because back in the day, tattooing was not like what it is today. It was not at all a respectable, mainstream kind of concern. Tattooing was a scumbag, outlaw, underground, criminal, dangerous kind of, world. It was not something that, your average kind of, upscale person would have access to. It was, really was, drunken sailors and fucking bikers and ex-cons and criminals and blue-collar workers. So it was not like something that was...
It was not a hoity-toity rock and roll fucking status thing.
No, it wasn't cool with polite society in any way, shape, or form. And I got introduced to it through this fascination with just anything that was outside the realm that was normalcy. Unacceptable, anything that was outlaw. And so, tattooing... I came into contact with it because, I was traveling the world, as a hobo, and I'm in, dive bars in the fucking coast of fucking southern Mexico where the ships come and go, and I'm seeing sailors with tattoos, and I'm like, wow, I could do that. And so, I started tattooing by hand poking stuff on, sailors, in the port of Veracruz, where I lived, where I sort of hung out.
Mostly American sailors?
No, Mexicans and people, Chinamen, people from all over.
How do you wind up being the tattoo artist for these international merchants?
Well, I wasn't the tattoo artist. I was just met some people, and they taught me how to hand poke tattoos, and we hand poked shit on each other, and then I got work on a ship and shipped out and wound up in Brazil. I jumped ship in Brazil and then hitchhiked across South America and ended up in Rio de Janeiro and met some guys who were also interested in learning how to tattoo, and we started building these, homemade tattoo machines, like jailhouse rigs together, because you couldn't have access to tattoo equipment back then, and so we started tattooing each other, and one thing led to another, and eventually I came back to the States and learned to tattoo for some proper tattoo, gurus who were like famous old school tattoo guys that took me under their wing, and the rest is kind of history,
But you left being strung out, got on the road, and did drugs ever cross your path in those first years? Were you drinking?
No, I was drinking like crazy. I became, it's like I swapped, I
narcotics for alcohol.
Well, I swapped staterooms on the Titanic, but it took a long time for that fucking boat to hit the fucking iceberg. That I got sober many years later.
I know, and I mean, the story from the movie that caught my fancy is you meet your wife, the Brazilian lady, and your friend gives you some giant bag of heroin for the wedding.
For the wedding present.
Had you not been using up to that point?
I had not been using.
It's very exciting to get heroin when you haven't been using for a while. Did you get scared? Or
I've been drinking, and I'd been doing a great deal of cocaine, but then there was no heroin in Brazil, and this guy who was our best man at the wedding came back from Afghanistan or someplace, and he brought a big bag of heroin to Brazil, which is like unheard of. Brazil, there's no heroin. There never was. And he's like, look what I got. And we're like, hey, and so we.
And your wife falls for it too.
Oh yeah, we were shooting up speedballs, at the wedding and having a great time until I OD'd and they knocked down the door and saved me. But that was just one of many times. I mean, we all have these adventures, man. I mean, anybody who's a real addict or alcoholic, has a lot of war stories. I mean, it's inevitable. It's almost boringly predictable. When I go to AA meetings and I hear these big long drugalogs or drunkalogs, I'm like, yeah.
But you said you liked our show because that's basically all we do on the show.
I love it. But when it comes to recovery,
no, it shouldn't. Yeah, but this is not about recovery. This is about entertainment. This is about feeling a part of something.
It's all good. Yeah, no, I know. Look, it has its fucking place, and God bless it. But when it comes to recovery, the rabbit hole goes a lot deeper. And yeah, experience strength and hope. Yeah, identification. Yeah, check. Did that. Okay, been there, done that.
Now, how did you get better? Right, that's what happens in a meeting. You want to know how somebody did it, what they did to get better.
Hit bottom and beg for help. That's my final run because I got sober back in 19.
No, I don't mean how you get better. I mean in a meeting. Rather than wanting to hear the rabbit hole of drunkalog after drunkalog, you want to hear the solution.
Well, at this point, I want to hear anything. I don't care. Everything's good. It's all grist for the mill. I love the drunkalogs, but if I was a newcomer and that's all I heard, which is what it was in 1986 when I first came to my first meeting, and all I could hear was drunkalogs and don't drink no matter what and go to meetings. And that, what they didn't mention was that in the book it says, the doctor's opinion, he says we're restless, irritable, and discontent when we don't drink, when we don't get our medicine, when we don't get high, when we don't get our drugs. We're restless, irritable, and discontent by nature because that's why we used these substances, man, and it says somewhere else in the book, men and women like to drink because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Well, conversely, yeah, that's me. I like the effect. I don't drink for the taste. I drink because I like to get fucking blitto. And Blitto.
I never heard Blitto either.
It just came out.
I
don't know. So conversely, it means if I like the effect produced by alcohol and drugs, whatever, it also means I don't like the effect produced by sobriety, because when I'm sober and I don't have my medicine, I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. And unless I can have an entire psychic change, my chances of recovery are zilch, zero. So that's where the work comes in.
When you come back to the States, you go to L.A. or you go to New York?
Oh, God. I ended up in L.A.
And you're doing tattoos in L.A.?
I'm apprenticing for one of the great old tattoo men of tattoo history, Bob Shaw.
Ironically, another Shaw. Unrelated.
Unrelated, but more of a father to me than my father. And he brought me into the thing, taught me to work, put a machine in my hand, said, get to work. Then he moved to Texas, so I followed him out to Texas. We were here on the Long Beach Pike for years, and then he moved to Texas, and I followed him to Texas. Worked with him side by side for, I don't know, a year and a half or something, and then he decided he was going to move into some one-horse town on the Gulf Coast of Texas, and I didn't want to go there. I wanted to see the big time, so I went to New Orleans, opened a shop there with Sailor Moses. We tattooed all kinds of people there, and then...
Did you start seeing your life you were going to be a tattoo artist? Was that what you started to see? Like you... Because you were hoboing around, you were doing this, you were doing that, and then all of a sudden you kind of have a trade. And are you like, this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah, but I mean, I can only really see my life clearly because it's such a crazy quilt of circumstances and stuff and stories and people, places, things, you know. I can only start to see my life in any kind of objective perspective in retrospect, in the rear view mirror. I can't see shit while I'm living it because, you know, I don't know what's going on. I'm just, you know, living like a fucking feral cat, you know, and, you know. So in retrospect, I can look back over the circumstances of my life in, like, you know, inventory and go like, wow, what a crazy fucking ride. And I had no idea where I was going at the time, because we don't. I mean, I don't know what the fuck's next, you know, but I think I do. And, you know, it's the mind is it's a tremendous place, you know. It's
But you wound up becoming this incredible innovator. How was the tattoo culture changing when you got to New Orleans?
It wasn't. I mean, there was starting to be some players coming into the thing, guys like Ed Hardy, and, you know, there was some innovative shit going on. It was just by the time I got to New Orleans, they had like maybe the first tattoo convention where suddenly all these people from all over the world got together in one place and were like looking at each other's stuff, and there was people doing kind of some fancy shit that had never been done before. And, you know, I guess I was kind of destined to become one of those guys, but it was a turning point, because up to then tattoos were just like little stamps you put on people, and it was, you know, the iconography was
Limited,
you know, standardized, you know, and it was very you know, kind of primitive in a cool way. But now you had people like that were going to Japan and studying Oriental tattooing, and, you know, you had Ed Hardy, who was like, you know, blasting out all this incredible work, and, you know, people like that were doing, you know, punk rock became a thing, so people were more like, oh, let's do something different. And
what was the punk rock, what was the tattoo language of punk rock?
Well, it was just...
I guess it was so outsider.
Those are the guys that gave me my chance to innovate. When I started wanting to do different kind of stuff that nobody had ever done before, it was basically the punk rockers that gave me the freedom to start doing shit that nobody else thought was like even an option.
Give me an example, please.
I mean, you know, I tattooed a lot of people in that scene, you know. I mean, some of them are well known, like, you know, Dee Ramone, and, you know, guys.
Was he a total mess when you tattooed him?
No, he was cool, man. I love Dee. I was actually, you know, he was a good guy, man. You know, we actually dated the same girl for a while, you know.
At the same time?
No, I got sloppy seconds to Dee. But wow, yeah, that was cool. But yeah, so I mean, but the punk rock, you know, the punk rock thing gave artists like me, and there weren't many at the time, at least carte blanche to do some different shit, because these guys were just like, yeah, do whatever the fuck, you know. It wasn't like I want a heart with mom, or you know, this or that, a dragon. You know, these guys were just like, yeah, go off, man. You know.
Well, so, it seems like punk rock culture definitely echoed what the tattoo scene was, which was total outside outlaw stuff.
Yeah, it did, but they took it to a next level, or they let the few innovators that were around at the time take it to the next level on their fucking hide, you know. So you know, it was a cool thing.
And when do you get to New York?
I don't know. I mean, I was in New Orleans. Then from New Orleans, they had a war down in South America. So I got on a plane and took my tattoo shit to Belize City in like the very early 80s.
What made you go down there?
Because they were having a war in South America. And Belize at the time was British Honduras, or just had gotten independence from England, but they still had a thing with an arrangement with the crown where they could have a military base there. So they were shipping all these fucking soldiers down to South America to fight this war in Argentina, and they were staging from Belize City. So I heard that there was going to be all this military presence in Belize City. So I packed up my shit and I moved down there, and opened a tattoo shop. And back then, Belize City was the shithole of the world. I mean, open sewers. It was just like primitive beyond belief, you know. And I'm there, and I opened this fucking tattoo shop right next to a pub where all the British soldiers would go and get drunk at night. And so I was just busier than an ass-kicking contest, you know, just like one-legged man. And I'm in there tattooing these guys, and I made friends with the nephew of the prime minister of the country, who was a big coke smuggler, and we were just going out to his private island on weekends and just doing all kinds of coke. And you could buy fucking basically opiates over the counter in the one drugstore downtown Belize City. So I'm buying all these fucking drugs from the
What are you getting?
What the fuck was it called? It was this stuff. William Burroughs talks about it a lot. It was the stuff that the stuff they'd give to babies to make them stop crying.
Laudanum? No.
It was like that.
It was, I know what you're
Paragoric.
talking about. Paragoric. He loved chugging the Paragoric.
Tincture of Paragoric. You could buy it over the
What
counter.
is it exactly?
Well, it's basically...
The old Paragoric.
It's basically opium-based in a solution of camphor and alcohol, I think.
You're the first dopey guest that ever drank Paragoric.
Well, I didn't drink Paragoric. What we would do was we would put because it's an opium base. It's a pure opium base, but it's in this suspension of liquid, which contains camphor and alcohol and maybe some other shit. So we would take this stuff. I learned to take this stuff and put it in a pan with a hot plate, and you'd boil it. And you'd bile off all the alcohol and the camphor, and you were left with the fucking opium. Then you'd scrape the opium up, and you could shoot that up.
And that's what you were doing?
Yeah, we were doing that with a lot of cocaine because these guys were cocaine smugglers. So we had, cocaine coming up from South America, and, this Paragoric that was basically heroin by the time we got finished refining it. And we would just be shooting speedballs on this beautiful paradise island out in the middle of the Caribbean, and just laying in a fucking hammock, just like, nodding. And then, Monday I'd go back to the tattoo shop, and
one interesting
there was also
thing,
crack houses there in little back
were you
alleys.
smoking a lot of crack?
They didn't call it crack back then. I think they called it freebase.
Yeah.
But there was like these fucking shacks, with these fucking I mean, everybody was like a Rasta, it was all black. The whole country was black. I was like one of the only white guys there. If I'm, I always thought I was black. It was a surprise when somebody told me I was white, So that probably comes from my father because he grew up with, all these old black musicians. So anyway, so I'm in these little fucking shacks out in the middle of the jungle in the middle of the night smoking this fucking crack with all these fucking Rastas and shit who weren't real Rastas, of course, because real Rastas are they're righteous people, know. But no, these guys were like, just criminals, and we were just smoking crack all night. It was a crazy time. Anyway, so I went. Eventually, that all crashed and burned. The war ended. The soldiers went away, and I packed up and went back to New Orleans, and I was tattooing there for a while. And then some rock and roll guys came to New Orleans, and I tattooed them. They were in a band called the Fuzz Tones, and I made friends with them. And then they were like, "Man, what are you doing in this shithole? You should come to New York. We got 1 million fucking people would love to get tattooed by you there." So I was like, "Well, I burned out this scene, so." So I jumped in the van with them, and we drove to New York. And
one thing I find interesting is that you're strung out on heroin when you're a kid. You have to kick. You wind up shooting a ton of dope in Brazil. How do you get away with not staying on heroin?
I don't know.
You just did. You were off and on and off. I like that you don't know a lot of answers to these questions.
I don't know. There was times when I was strung out for years like a lab rat, and then I'd get off it. But, you're not going to get clean and stay clean until you have that,
spiritual
that
psychic change.
So I didn't have that psychic change. So I was just, I just bopping around from one place to another, from one drug to another, from one girl to another, from one existence to another, like a fucking pinball in a fucking machine. Ding, 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 And
so I grew up in Manhattan. And I lived in
My
Manhattan.
condolences.
And I didn't know you started Fun City.
Oh, yeah.
So what year do you start Fun City?
Well, allegedly, like in the 1970s,
Right.
when I first started tattooing, but the actual physical,
When did you invent
place.
Fun City? How does that even happen?
I don't know, maybe 1980.
And you have this thought of a place called Fun City?
Well, New York City back when I was a kid, because I used to go to New York sporadically when I was a kid. You know, I had a uncle that was my mother's brother, and he was a beatnik. He was a beatnik, and he was a writer, and he was kind of like hovering around the beat scene like a fucking drunken fruit fly.
Was it Allen Ginsberg?
No.
Okay, just
No,
making
but
sure.
he was part of that crew.
Yeah.
But he was like...
Was it Gregory Orlovsky?
No, it was
Okay.
nobody that you
I'm
know unless you read my books.
I'm just playing.
No,
Just
it
playing.
was nobody, but he was with these
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
He was part of that scene. Anyway, he was a beatnik writer, and he was part of the scene, and he was acquainted with all the people you just mentioned and Kerouac. But he lived like a rat in a fucking dirty little tenement apartment with his 3 kids and his crazy wife, and just drunkenness. But, you know, he was my hero because he was cool. He was the opposite of my mother. My mother was like kind of pretentious, wanted to be, you know, Hollywood, But this guy was like, you know, like a 2-fisted fucking badass fucking beatnik writer. Anyway, so I'd go when I was an early teenager. My mother'd ship me to New York, and I'd spend the summers with my crazy beatnik uncle and his family there, and that was all fun and games too. But I didn't go to New York to set up shop as a tattoo artist way later in life, when I was, I don't know, in my 30s.
Did you ever meet William Burroughs, just out of curiosity?
We've crossed paths. I can't say we were like tight, but yeah, we've been.
You met him in passing.
Yeah, we've been in the same place at the same time.
What about Bob Dylan? I'm always looking for Bob Dylan stories.
Same thing, but I don't have any stories. I mean, I went to visit. I was living in Paris with Johnny Depp while he was filming a Bukowski. No, a fucking, what I say Bukowski, the fucking Polanski movie.
Yeah.
Where he kind of played me in a weird way. Johnny sort of clipped my image and incorporated it into the character he was playing, and I didn't realize until I saw it on the screen, and I was like, that's me. And then I realized he'd been studying me without maybe even knowing it, but we were living together in Paris. Anyway, so we're in Paris. I'm with my woman at the time. He's with his new woman, who turned out to be the mother of his kids. Anyway, we're all living together in this big mansion in Montmartre in Paris, and he's doing the Polanski thing. And he says, "Oh, Bob Dylan's playing a gig in Rome. We got to go see him." So we all jump on this private jet that he chartered, and we go to fucking Rome. We're driving around Rome and stop and ate some pizza, and then we go to this gig, and we're sitting up on the side of the stage for this Dylan show in this, like, the Coliseum or some fucking thing. And Dylan comes out and he starts playing, and I'm sitting like, from here to that tree from Bob Dylan on stage, and I haven't slept in days, and I promptly fell asleep, and I slept through the whole fucking show. But my girlfriend, who stayed awake, told me I didn't miss anything. She said it sucked.
Yeah, you always want. I know that there will be a great Bob Dylan show again. That one day it'll happen, and he'll play the songs and recognize.
You'd have to go back in time, in my sort of perspective, because I thought Bob Dylan was one of the greatest songwriters in the world of all fucking time. When you go back to those times, Bob Dylan. He made a bargain with the devil to come up with that shit.
Do you think on that? Did you see that 60 Minutes interview where he says that he made a deal?
Yeah.
Do you think that's what he's saying?
I don't know. He made a bargain with somebody, because you don't make that kind of greatness, and I can tell you this from experience. You do not make that kind of greatness manifest on earth without a very strong connection to source. That being the one, whatever you want to call it, God, infinite consciousness, wisdom of the universe, whatever the fuck.
Does the devil fall into the source too?
It's another.
Source.
It's another
it's a
source.
Darker
it's
source.
It's another source that they're all sources.
And when does your imagination explode into tattooing innovation?
I don't know.
You say I don't know a lot to these questions.
Well, there's a source that
When
manifests.
do you find that you're really tapping into it? From Get, or did you find that getting to New York?
I can only look back on it and say that happened, and how it happened is, up to wiser forms of intelligence than mine to determine.
Well, when you look back on your art, let's say your visual art career, not on your writing career, on your tattooing, what was your favorite period, and when do you think you're most important for yourself? Your favorite period. Let's just say that. Not most important.
A fortuitous confluence of circumstances combined to put me in the right place at the right time with a certain vision that I can't take a lot of credit for because it just came through me and allowed me to basically innovate styles that wound up changing the entire concept of tattooing internationally. If this was like something that could be quantified or patented or copyrighted, I'd be getting fucking royalty checks from all 15,000 tattoo artists a day from all over the world, but it doesn't work like that. How that came to happen, I don't know. How could I know? Only in retrospect can I say, well, I was obviously touched by some force greater than my own that used me as a channel to make this shit, I don't know.
And you set up Fun City on the Lower East Side.
Yeah.
And in the film, there are some people that I'm kind of friendly with in that film. Fucking Clayton and John Joseph.
No shit.
Yeah. And, Clayton's like around the corner from
Of course.
Katz's, and he's a Katz's guy.
Clayton's a big deal.
Yeah.
Joe Coleman, I don't know if you know him.
I don't
He's
know
a
him.
brother. But anyway, all those guys.
But
John Joseph.
you set up on the Lower East Side.
So I did. Well, I actually started when I first went to New York. When I first went to New York from New Orleans with these rock and roll guys, they
Fuzztones.
The Fuzztones. I stayed with them for a couple days, and then I went and sought out this guy who was the big tattoo guru of New York at the time, Spider Webb.
Yeah.
He was a big deal. And he'd written books. He wrote the first book about tattooing that was like, woo, in the early 80s. That was like, wow, there's a book. Somebody wrote a book about tattooing. Got to read this, So, because there was nothing about tattooing back then.
When did you meet Clayton? Just out of curiosity.
Wait a minute. No, so Spider Webb.
Sorry.
Webb. What a character. So I worked with him for about a year, and he just tossed me the keys to the place and be like, all right, Johnny, I'm going fishing, and you just tell anybody comes in here, just tell them you're me and take the money.
So you took over his shop.
I took over his shop with his permission, and I impersonated him for quite a while.
Did you try to cop his style for it?
No, he had no style. I mean, I had the style, but he had a style. But
and he had a good name.
He had a big name because he'd written this fucking book, and it was published on Simon & Schuster, and, it was the only book about tattooing back then. So, anyway, I branched off from him. Eventually, these rock and rollers I was tattooing all these punk rock guys, and they were like, man.
Who was coming through? I know Iggy Pop came through.
Well, Iggy came later, but Iggy, I actually first met Iggy back in the early 70s here in Hollywood, but that's a whole other story.
Tell us that story.
No!
Why not?
Because it's all in the fucking books.
Were you telling me to read the books or them to read the books?
Anybody.
Listen.
I can't cover all that. We'll be here till fucking
But
midnight.
everybody wants to hear an Iggy Pop story.
Iggy Pop.
Because you listen to a podcast, right? And someone says something about something, and you ask the question, they say, you got to read the book. You go, that's that.
Yeah, get the fucking book.
Well, read the book. What?
No, Iggy, okay. So the first time I met Iggy, I didn't really meet him. I was in Hollywood, teenage junkie, going to places, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Girlfriend of mine was like, we got to go see this show. We went to this little place called Rodney's on the Strip. It was Rodney Bingenheimer. He had this little place that was about as big as your fucking bathroom, and it was a club. And we went there, and we saw fucking Iggy, but Iggy wasn't there. It was just like this dark room with a bunch of people milling around, and all of a sudden you hear this scream, and out of the crowd comes this guy like a fucking banshee in the night, like stripped down to his fucking underwear with a big old switchblade knife, and he's carving himself up and blood's flying everywhere, and I'm like, whoa, this is cool, and that was my first encounter with Iggy, and he's like rubbing blood on everybody. There wasn't even a stage, I don't think. It was just like this mayhem situation. Look at a little squirrel. anyway, so there was this mayhem situation, and then I didn't meet Iggy again until, I was hanging out with Johnny Depp in New York, and they did the movie screening for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And I was there, and there was Johnny, and there was Hunter Thompson, and we were waiting to get into the movie screening, and I'm standing there outside the door, and I'm standing next to this guy who looks kind of familiar, and I'm like, "Are you Iggy Pop?" And he's like, "Yeah, hey, how you doing, man?" You know, and I was like, "Oh man," you know, and we started talking, and then, you know, we became pretty good friends, and we were neighbors on the Lower East Side. He was living on the Cristadora house, and I was living at Fun City, the old original tattoo shop around, you know, like Bowery and Houston there.
Just very close to Katz's.
Yeah, very close to Katz's. Right across the street.
Did you come by Katz's at all back then?
Yeah, I used to go there for lunch and just have a hot dog. It was cheap. It was fast. And I'd go back to work. But, yeah, so, you know, Iggy started coming around the tattoo shop, and we'd go out and, you know, double dates with our women and stuff. And, yeah, we got to be good friends then. I'm actually the guy that got him to leave New York and move to Miami, because I bought a place in Miami because I hated New York, but it was, you know, the source of my
income,
and my career and all that shit. But I'd moved to Miami, but I was still in New York. But every chance I got, I'd go to Miami and just, you know, chill with these old Cuban guys and hang out at the beach and, you know, whatever. And one day Iggy calls me and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" And I was like, "I'm in Miami. You should come down and see this place. It's fucking awesome." And he comes down. He came down and visited for the weekend, and I let him stay in my apartment. And next thing you know, he's like, "I really like it here, man. I think I could live here." And I was like, "Yeah." So I sold him the apartment and moved back to New York, and he stayed, and he's there to this fucking day.
And in the doc, he refers to you as JS, and you signed all your tattoos very significantly JS. When did you start doing that?
Back in the day.
In the first place?
Back in the day, people would ask for it.
The JS? For some authenticity?
For some reason.
They want the signature.
Well, it's like the guy said in the movie. He said, you know, talking about me, he said, "He was world famous before any of us knew who he was." That was just in the stars, I guess. And
you had a vision.
I didn't, though.
You didn't have a vision that you recognized, but you knew what you liked.
Well, I didn't have a knowledge that I had a vision. If I had a vision, it was just
happening.
I didn't know what the fuck was happening. It just happened. Now I can look back on it and go, "Wow, that was interesting." But, you know, I don't know. Some of us are kind of manifestors unconsciously.
Someone called me a manifesting engine.
You must be.
That sounds nice.
You must be. I mean, I saw your shit last night, and you definitely manifested a whole community of, you know, suffering souls who are finding redemption through your presence.
Through our fun.
You know,
yes.
Through your fucking crazy, wacky, dopey fucking modality of presenting recovery as a fucking fun, fucked up adventure.
You can call Dopey Fun City, maybe.
Well, you could use that.
I think it's good. Now,
maybe we could do a simulcast.
Yes, we've got to do something. I don't know, but we're doing something right now.
Well, this is fun.
Where's your drug addiction and alcoholism when you get to New York? What kind of level are you at?
I was actually stark raving sober. I got sober the first time I got sober. I came to L.A. From Brazil in 1986 with my wife at the time. Hit bottom, crashed and burned, ate shit, died 1,000 deaths, you know, the whole routine. Don't need to, you know, it's in the books. But
don't say it's in the books.
I'm going to fuck with you all day long.
It gets the listener upset.
Sorry.
Do you ever listen to stuff when people say read the book? Don't you get annoyed? Aren't you like, but I'm listening to this?
I'm breaking balls here.
Okay, you break a balls.
I'm breaking balls.
Make yourself happy.
So I crashed and burned, died 1,000 deaths. Had no place else to go. Went to my first AA meeting. I didn't even know there was such a thing.
In L.A.?
Yeah, I'm crashing and burning in L.A. I'm strung out like a fucking big dog. I'm living in this place I'm about to get evicted from. My wife and me are both strung out. And I'm like, fuck. I got to get help. And then I don't know what to do. I have no idea that there's any way out. I figure I'm just going to die like everybody else. I'm living in this apartment right above, what's the guy's name? Khalil from the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, what's his name?
Khalil. He was, I think, a guitar player. He was my downstairs neighbor.
Was that his name, Khalil?
Something like that. No, it was Hillel.
Hillel Slovak.
Hillel. Yeah, he was my downstairs neighbor.
No way.
And they pulled him out of there dead as a fucking...
When you were there?
Yeah. They pulled him out of his apartment dead. My other downstairs neighbor murdered his wife in front of me.
Oh, my God. Quite a building.
Crack attack. It was a great place. It was called the Happy Malaga Castle. Many of your viewers probably know of it.
Are you friendly with Bob Forrest?
I've known Bob Forrest since back in the day. Yeah.
You friendly with him?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I would say we're friendly. We're more like friendly. We're like family, even though we're from an extended family, and we don't see much of each other these days. But he came and visited me in Brazil, and we had some adventures there. But, yeah, I go back with Bob. Bob's a good guy. I love Bob. He owes me some money. I should probably give him a call.
Definitely give
Bob,
him a call.
You'll be hearing from me.
Very good.
Anyway, so...
Bob is one of the great patron saints of
No,
faith.
I love Bob. Bob is he's a G. And he's, he's doing the good Lord's work.
So you find AA in
So
LA.
wait, so I'm in LA. I'm strung out like a lab rat again. I'm in this place.
You've been strung out like a big dog and a lab rat.
And a fucking test monkey. I don't know.
Test tube monkey?
Test tube monkey.
Test tube monkey? Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah. So strung out in this place. Khalil from the Chili Peppers dying downstairs. Other downstairs neighbor murders his wife in front of us with a knife and gets hauled out by the police, and she's dying in the hallway. I mean, it was a fun place. Anyway, and then her ghost came and haunted us. I mean, there's a lot of stories. Anyway, so I'm strung out like this. My other downstairs neighbor is Bernie Bernstein. He was
the manager, right?
He was in a band called the Little Kings.
Yeah.
And Mark Rude was coming around. All these legendary, God rest them, But Bernie Bernstein's still alive and he's sober. Anyway, he was my drug dealer.
Bernie Bernstein?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he lived downstairs too. I'd just stomp on the floor and he'd be like, be right up.
What was he selling?
Smack.
So you had a resurgence in heroin.
Oh, yeah, I was all strung out.
Was Hillel on the same smack, you think?
Yeah, we all...
The Bernie Bernstein smack?
I don't know, but he died.
Okay.
He dead. So, anyway, we're there. I'm strung out. I'm circling the drain. I'm not a happy camper. We're about to get evicted. Things are bad. It's dark. Bad. And one day I'm sitting there and there's the TV in the background, like you do when you're strung out. And the TV's on the background, and somehow I just looked up at the TV, and I'm all like, and I look, and there's the screen on the TV, and it's like, this was 1986, and there's an ad for some kind of, got a problem with drugs? We've got your solution. It's like some drug clinic. I guess this was like the early beginnings of maybe, rehabs and shit like that I knew nothing about. But so I see this number on the screen, got a problem with drugs, and I'm like, Yes. And so call this number. So I call the number. I dial up the phone and I call the number, and it's some guy on the other side, and he's like, yeah, so what's up? And I was like, yeah, I'm strung out, got to get off this. I need help. I don't know what to do. And he starts asking me about insurance, and I'm like, what's that? I've been living in fucking slums of Brazil, and I'm like, insurance? What the fuck is that? And he's like, well, we take insurance. Do you have any money? And I'm like, money? What's that? So he's like, well, we can't really help you here because, you need to pay for this. But if you call this other place, you could get treatment for free. And I was like, well, tell me. And he gives me the number for Alcoholics Anonymous central office. And I don't know from Alcoholics Anonymous, so I call this number, and suddenly I'm getting 12-step by somebody on the other end of the phone. And probably the guy at the recovery place was also one of us, because he's sending me to AA. And so I'm talking to the lady or the guy on the phone, and he's like, oh, yeah, you need to go to a meeting, you can get help. And I was like, meeting? What's that? And he's like, well, let's see, where do you live? And I tell him, and he's like, oh, they got one right around the corner from where you are. It starts at 8 o'clock. And I'm like, okay. So I'm motivated because life is bad. So I'm like, I walk up to where this meeting is. I'm living on basically Sunset and Gower, and the meeting is like on Hollywood and Gower. Or no, Yucca and Gower. Anyway, it's a few blocks away. So I walk up there.
Are you all dope sick?
I'm dope sick. I'm covered in fucking, like I'd smash my head through a fucking plate glass window because I was so frustrated, and there's blood all over me. And you know, I was just at the end of being dope sick. I was feeble, and I smelled like a, you know, truckload of dead possums, and I had blood all over, blood stains all over, and a lot of reeking alcohol, of course, because, you know, when I was kicking, I drank a lot cheap wine and stuff. So, you know, I was like a vision for you, you know. And I walk up to this meeting, and I look, and on this corner there's like all these people standing around looking kind of happy and smoking cigarettes, and, you know, it's like, you know, your typical, you know, before the meeting, all these people gathering around. I was like, oh, hell no, I can't. What an order. I can't go through with it. Right. So I wander back down to the local, you know, convenience store on the corner, and I get a big old bottle of Old English, and I just power that fucking thing down and puke in the parking lot. And then I'm like, I circled around the block a few times watching all these people, and like, I can't go in there, man. That's too much. And then suddenly they all went inside, and I was like, oh, wow, the coast is clear. Maybe I could sneak in and nobody will see me, you know. I can just kind of slither in the back and just kind of hide out and check this thing out and see what's going on. Is it safe? I don't know. So I slither in the back door, and I get in there, and I look, and there's this big crowd of people, and they're sitting in chairs, and there's this guy up on the podium talking, and I'm like, whoa. And as soon as I got in there, somebody comes up to me and goes like, hey, man, how you doing? You all right? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, come on, man, look at your seat, man. You want to sit down? And I was like, I guess. And so, you know, they sort of surrounded me and ushered me to a seat. And I sat there, and it was just like, yeah, just chill. Sit down, listen, you know, just, you're at home. And I was like, okay. And I sat there, and this lady was sharing from the podium. She was leading the meeting. And she didn't look nothing like me. I was covered in blood and shit and all beat up, you know, beat up from the feet up. And she's like looking like nice, and, you know, it's like this nice black lady, and she's wearing a nice business suit and very clean. And but she started sharing, she started telling her story. And as soon as she started telling her story about the feelings and the, you know, she wasn't a big drunkalog. She was talking about how she felt and why she liked to drink and why she was, you know, all that stuff, you know. And when she started sharing her story, I just started crying. And for the first time in my life, I'm getting choked up right now, because for the first time in my life, I heard something talked about that I probably knew in the depths of my soul, but I never suspected that that there was actually a way that I didn't have to die in the gutter like all my friends and all the people I came up with. And I heard that story, and it touched me so deeply that, like, I was like, I'm in. And then after the meeting, a bunch of guys came around and gave me their numbers, and they were like, yeah, we're going to go to another meeting tomorrow, you know, you should come with us. And, you know, they surrounded me, and I got into the middle of the fucking herd.
And you were like, I get this.
Yeah.
Even though it was not was it outlaw shit to you, or did it just speak the language of your heart?
This language of the heart. And it was like, you know, there were kids that were strung out like me.
You felt like it was your people.
It was my tribe. And they took me in, and I started running with these guys. And, you know, some of them are still sober today. I saw one today at the fucking meeting down there. He's fucking 40 years sober.
And that's when you got sober?
That's when I first got sober. And what happened was, you know, I stayed sober, abstinent, in L.A., going to all the meetings, got the sponsor, got the this, did the that, got the sponsor was more clueless than me, didn't know, you know, and his ass from a fucking anthill. But, you know, but that's what we did, you know, the blind leading the blind. That's AA in a lot of instances. You know, without the literature, AA would be up shit's creek with a turd for a fucking paddle, man, you know. But it was not a literature-oriented kind of group.
Then,
It
right? Wasn't it like it was not?
It wasn't the big
steps
book,
weren't.
It wasn't the priority. It was like, I always used to think, oh well, maybe someday when I'm, when I've been around for a while, they'll take me in the back room and there'll be all these guys with long beards and they'll be like, this is how you practice recovery. But I'm just fake it till you make it. That's all I could hear. Or don't drink no matter what and go to meetings. That's all I could hear. Steps? What the fuck's that? I might as well be in fucking Chinese. So I'm going to the meetings and I'm doing the deal and I got the commitments and, we used to have cigarettes, you'd clean the ashtrays after the meeting. And so did all that and I was right in the middle of it for about a year. And then I decided I'm moving to New York. I'm moving to New York. I'm going to make, I'm going to recover all the money, property, prestige I never got because I was fucking dope sick or drunk. So I go to New York, and pretty soon, I tried going to a couple meetings, but suddenly it wasn't my home group. It wasn't all the love I knew, and I was just a stranger, and nobody really bothered with me, and that was my excuse to just get really busy building my career, and I didn't have time for meetings. And so I stayed stark raving sober like that for almost 10 years.
In New York.
All I could remember was don't drink no matter what. And that was all I could remember. So I didn't drink no matter what. And I became crazier and crazier and crazier. I became a dangerous
I just realized that
guy.
That Fun City was also a stone's throw from that Hell's Angels clubhouse. Were you tatting those guys?
Well, some of those guys were my peeps, man. Still to this day, I'm friendly with the club, with people in the club. I mean, that was my peeps. I hang around.
I used to buy weed at a spot across the street from that place.
Nothing to do with them.
Of course not.
Nothing to do with them. That just happens.
It was a coincidence.
We don't want to talk about any of that. That's not
just
cool.
A coincidence.
That's not cool.
No, it was a great spot. When I was a kid, I worked at Katz's, and they'd pay me in cash daily, and I would go to that street on 3rd Street and go to that spot and spend my day on a bag and go home when I was a kid.
I don't know anything about that, but
I didn't say it was their spot. I said it was across the street.
I was friends and still am friends with a lot of fucking really good guys in the club, and that's that. But so
I didn't insinuate anything.
Oh, well, I
just said it was on the same street.
I should hope not. But anyway,
we love the Hells Angels on Dopey.
Good. Anyway, so what was I talking about before I was?
You were stone cold. You were stone cold sober in the city.
Yeah.
But you were not happy, joyous, and free.
No, I was dangerous to myself and everybody around me. I wouldn't go out for a pack of cigarettes without 2 guns. I was always carrying.
Yeah. When did you start collecting the guns?
Long story, but let me just share in a general way. I was in a bad headspace. I was violent. I was crazy. I was hateful.
Who are you violent to?
Anybody that fucking.
Oh, that's when they said Jonathan Shaw is a wild man.
Wild man. I was wild. I was angry. I was restless, irritable, and discontent.
Right.
And I carried 2 guns at all times and wasn't, hesitant to pistol whip any poor fool that got in my way, even though I had no way. I was just a
crazy person.
Mean-spirited, pissed off, unconscious, dry. I was so fucking dry you could snap my fucking ears off. I could start a fucking forest fire. I was so dry. And I didn't know that, I didn't know anything. I just thought this is how you live. You get ahead and, hooray for me and fuck you, whoever you are. So that was my MO in those days. And I stayed like that until one day I was in Brazil visiting.
Isn't it very interesting?
Let me go on.
That Brazil plays such a pivotal role in your whole life.
Everything's interesting,
but this is particularly interesting. Why is it that Brazil played such an important role?
Destiny, past lives, ayahuasca,
Carlos Castaneda.
Is he Brazilian? No, but he's South American.
Okay.
Anyway, actually, I know people that worked with him. Anyway, so I'm in New York. I'm restless, irritable, discontent. I'm pissed off. Get out of my way. Give me what you got and fuck off and die. So I'm that guy. And
but your store is very successful.
Very successful.
And covered by the media and worshipped by
I was on David Letterman,
right,
all that shit. Clint Eastwood, whatever. So I'm this guy. You were talking about sobriety. You were asking me about sobriety.
They wanted to talk open-ended here. Anyway, here we go.
No, easy, Tiger. So I'm walking around New York, dry as a fucking
Twig.
Egyptian mummy.
There we go.
You know,
Yeah.
packing heat, and angry. And one day I'm in Brazil. I go back to Brazil for a month or so, and I'm visiting with friends, and we're hanging out, and we're at a big table of a bunch of people, and everybody's drinking beer, and I got my mineral water, I got my fizzy water. And I'm looking at the beer, and I remembered, like, during the time that I was dry without AA, I was drinking a lot of this non-alcoholic beer. That was a thing back then, it was a big thing. So I'm drinking non-alcoholic. Now I'm in Brazil, so I asked the waiter, everybody's drinking beer, and I got mineral water. It's not sexy, so I asked the waiter to bring me a non-alcoholic beer, and he looks at me like I just ordered a fucking giraffe or something. He's like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Oh, they don't have it here. Never mind." So I have the bright idea that I'm going to take like 2 fingers of beer off of somebody's glass and pour it into my glass and then fill it up with mineral water, and I've made my own non-alcoholic beer.
Brilliant.
Just like Bill Wilson
Brilliant.
did with the milk.
Yes.
The milk
Whiskey and the milk. Yes.
Yeah. So I did that exact same thing.
Yes.
I said, I'll make a non-alcoholic beer. I'll just get 2 fingers of somebody's beer and fill the rest up with mineral water. It's going to be fine. And by the end of the night, I was drinking beer like a gentleman. And then I was like, these fucking AAs lied to me. They said I was going to be struck back to the place where I bottomed out the minute I picked up again, and I didn't. So somewhere in the literature, it says it's the great obsession of every abnormal drinker that someday I'll be able to control and enjoy my drinking. So I went to great lengths to do that for about a year. I would just have a couple of social drinks at the bar, and then I'd be like, okay, I got a little buzz going, it's good, I'm going home. And I did that for about a year just to prove to myself that I was an alcoholic.
The experiment of controlled drinking was successful.
Until it wasn't. And then one day I was at the bar having my second drink, and I was in the bathroom, and some guy walks in and goes, "Hey, you want a bump?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" Just like that. Bam! Next thing you know, I'm off chasing a fucking 8-ball. Next thing you know, I'm off shooting speedballs. Next thing you know, I'm in that place of pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. Couldn't get out of bed, crying, miserable. How did I end up here again? I thought I'd never do this again. I tried to go back to AA. Didn't work. I couldn't face AA. I'd slither into the back of the room, sit there for 5 minutes and be like, nah. Walk back out, get high, miserable.
Drug of choice at the time is speedballs.
Speedballs, alcohol, pills, whatever the fuck.
But you weren't a straight heroin addict at that point. Like you weren't like.
I ended up strung out again. But I'm an eclectic kind of guy. I like to do whatever you got.
Sure.
So there
we
was
like
that.
to call them garbage heads.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. I was good. I was good with whatever was around, but it was not good. I was not good at all. I was just miserable. I was just taking drugs just to see if I could maybe get some relief from my existential nausea, and so that happened, and it went on and on like that, and then finally I ended up back in LA in my mother's garage shooting speedballs and drinking whiskey, and I got a notepad like this out, and I'm writing my first step while I've been up for 3 or 4 days now, and I'm writing my first step in the notepad, jittery as fuck, been up for 3 days, and then I go back in the bathroom and shoot up a big old speedball, and right at that moment, as soon as I put the plunger in, I'm like, oh shit, I did too much. You know that feeling?
Yeah.
And suddenly my heart's about to explode, and I'm starting to, like, things are getting black.
On the edges.
And I said the first sincere prayer I'd ever said in my entire fucking miserable life. I said, just as the lights went out, I said, God help me. And the words just leapt out of my mouth, and I fucking went over sideways and cracked my head on the toilet and was out. And I woke up at some point later. I woke up and covered in blood, and the fucking syringe laying there, and that was it. I said, I'm done. Now I can concede complete defeat. For the first time in my fucking life, I was
Surrender.
done.
You were ready for surrender.
I had a big surrender, and I picked up my phone.
Was that an actual OD?
Yeah. But it was not the OD where you just die. It was the OD where you almost die.
Yeah.
And then you wake up and you're like, oh, shit, I'm still alive. And I said, God help me. And he did. Ooh, wow. There must be something to this AA shit, that I'd never heard. And so I picked up the phone right there. It's like 9 a.m. I pick up the phone and I call, of all people, Johnny Depp.
When did you meet Johnny Depp?
That's a long story. I don't want to talk much about Johnny. That's a
You
whole
keep
other
bringing him up. If I don't ask, the audience is going to be like, well, you ask about Bob Dylan, you don't ask about Johnny Depp.
So, whatever. I go back with
Call Johnny. Whatever.
Okay, so I called Johnny and I said, I'm done. Now, he's not necessarily sober at the time, but he's around sober people and he knows sober people. And I called him and I said, dude, I'm done. I need to get to an AA meeting. Can you help me? Because he was like the only person I was really talking to then, I wasn't talking to a lot of AA people. He was the closest thing I could find to an AA person because he knew a lot of people in AA. Speaking of Bob Forrest. So he's like, I said, I'm done. I need help. Can you get me to an AA meeting? It was a Sunday morning. And he fucking gets in his car and he, this is before he got real famous and he could still drive around, So he gets in his car and he drives over to my mother's house and he pulls me out of there and takes me. He's already made some phone calls and he takes me to this fucking AA meeting. And I think Steve Jones was the secretary of the meeting at the log cabin.
Dopey dream guest Steve Jones.
And Bob Forrest was there. And Johnny came into the meeting and sat down right in the front row, and I'm sat at the meeting between Johnny and Bob Forrest, and they just surrounded me, and the meeting started. And at that time, people came up to me who I'd actually been friends with when I first got sober, and they were like, oh man, it's so good you made it back.
Wow.
And I just sat there and cried. And that's when my real journey in recovery began. That's 24 and a half years ago. And that's when I was like, okay, I had somebody said, first time around is free. Second time, you got to work for it because there won't be a third time for most of us.
So how did it work that when you came back, like, what did you do? What clicked? What made you feel like it could work?
Well, because I'd had those 10 years of being dry as a fucking Aztec mummy, and I knew that didn't work. And so, by the grace of God, man, I started to see myself. I tore through the AA literature, and I started to really identify stuff in myself.
Right.
It was like, suddenly I realized the disease of alcoholism has nothing to do with alcohol.
How old were you?
When I got sober this time, 48 years old.
I love that. That's amazing.
I'm 72 now.
And you look incredible. But that is so fucking cool. Because people out there don't think that they're too old. They can't do it. I got sober when I was 41.
Wow.
You got sober when you were 48. I love that. It's amazing. And so how, between then and discovering the spirit molecule, what happens?
What happened was I got gung-ho with AA. I went to a lot of meetings. I read the literature, I'm too hard-headed to get a sponsor at the time, but I'm going to study this shit. And I started reading a lot of books. I read Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount and underlined every line and every fucking page. And, after I was about 6 months sober, going to like the regular dog and pony show meetings here in Hollywood, I started to get very hateful, and I started to feel that old misanthropic, hateful dude,
resentment.
And I called somebody in AA who I had actually kind of helped or inspired in some way to get sober back in the day, and I called this gal. I mean, she didn't get sober because of me, but we were in the same building. She was Texas Terry, and she had a band. She was like a rock and roll chick, and she was sober now. And she'd gotten sober right after me originally and stayed sober, so she's in AA. She's like a regular AA gal. and she was probably one of my only real old friends in AA that I could remember. And so I called her on the phone, and I was complaining and bitching and moaning and saying all this stuff about, I hate these meetings and these people suck, and they think they're too cool for school, and everybody's it's like a
clique.
It's like a clique. It's like a cult. I don't like it, but I know I got to stay sober. I don't know, man. Maybe I can find a better meeting. She's like, I got a meeting for you. So she grabbed me and she took me to this meeting where they talk about the disease of alcoholism. They start with step 0, and they start talking about restless, irritable discontent. They start talking about the alcoholic mind. They talk about untreated alcoholism. They talk about dry drunk. They talk about what the steps are for in application. It was like suddenly I'm in this fucking master class, and these guys are like drilling shit into my, watch your mind. What are your thoughts saying? Do you have a fault-fighting mind?
Did you find that this really opened you up?
Fuck yeah. That's when I started to see what was really wrong with me, and everything in the big book suddenly just
made
came
sense.
to life in full living color. It's like selfishness, self-centeredness. These we think are the roots of our problem. We stepped on the toes of our fellows and they retaliated and all this stuff. And suddenly I'm like, whoa, this is me. And we started studying Dr. Tebow, where he talks about the alcoholic having an infantile ego and identifying that, like I've got an infantile ego. I'm a big fucking
baby.
Overgrown bitch of a baby. This is no good. I'm supposed to be like this grown man. What's up? And so, that's where I started to really get recovery. And that's when I started, after, really getting deep into steps 1, 2, and 3, alcoholic, could not manage my own life, my own thought life. Doesn't matter if I'm drunk or sober, I'm still crazy as a shithouse rat. Alcoholic, could not manage my own life. B, probably no human power could have relieved my alcoholism. And I always say, I think they put that probably in there just to be polite.
Right.
And then it says, God could, and what if he were sought? Well, I'm like, God, what the fuck's that? My conception of God was like guys standing on a street corner with Bibles preaching Jesus. I'm like, what's this fucking God shit? This is bullshit. So they explained to me, well, you need to build a relationship with a power greater than yourself if you want to be restored to sanity. But before you're going to do that, or even have any willingness to do that, you got to admit you're fucking insane. And it was clearly pointed out to me through my studies in this group that I was clearly insane. And it didn't matter how many years sober I was more insane sober than I was drunk. Of course, because if I'm drinking and taking drugs, it's treating my restless, irritable discontent. If I'm not taking that stuff, I'm crazier than a fucking lunatic. So then it hit home. It's like, oh, well, how do I find a relationship with this power that's going to restore me to sanity? Well, you start talking to something other than yourself, because you got a self-talking mind, and it's telling you all this shit, and it's telling all this negative shit, and it's telling you this shit in your own voice. So you think it's you, but it's really not you. It's a lower power. So if you got a lower power running your life into the fucking gutter, then you need to find a higher power. What's that?
Help me out with lower power, because I hear people talking about it all the time. And Spirits
of the damned, my friend.
Really?
Spirits of the damned. Junkies that OD'd in a body, and now they're wandering the earth like lost fucking souls, and they need
hosts.
They need a host. So they find somebody who's restless, irritable, and discontent. They find somebody who's like,
it's
pissed
like
off.
The Duppies in Jamaica.
Fuck yeah. And they jump in, and they need a body to drive them to the dope house. They need a body to drive them to the liquor store. They need a body. And they come in and they inhabit this earthly body, and I become their fucking horse.
But you're more comfortable with the lower power than the higher power, like actually believing it.
That's because it's all you know. It's the life you know. All I know is I'm full of resentments. I'm full of self-pity. I'm full of, pain, existential angst. I've got ants in my pants and the need to dance, and I'm pissed off, and I hate everything and everybody. The colors are too bright. The weather's all wrong. I don't like your fucking socks.
I gave you nice socks.
I don't like it. Whatever it is, I don't like it.
So how does God come to you?
So I know one way I can get out of this. I could take a fix. I could take a line. I can swallow some pills and drink some booze, and I'm good. But now it doesn't work anymore. My magic wand has melted, and now I'm between a fucking rock and a hard place. What do? Well, they said God could and would if he were sought, so I start seeking. And I seek in many ways, and I'm asking questions, and they're telling me talk to this power, even though you don't believe in it. So I'm talking to some pie-in-the-sky Jesus I don't believe in, and I'm like, hey, could you be with me? Could you help me? Could you show me a sign that you exist? And that's when strange things start happening. Suddenly the phone rings, and it's somebody going, hey, I need help. And then suddenly I'm helping somebody. And it's like, oh, something heard me. I guess I was praying. They just didn't talk in terms of prayer. They just said, talk to anything but yourself. You're in your mind. Your mind's telling you ratty shit. It's telling you, everything sucks. Start talking to a power, any power. Just say, hey, are you there? Can you help me? Can you teach me? Can you guide me? Can you make something happen? I'm miserable. I'm pissed. I'm hopeless. I'm depressed. And I start talking to this other power, and suddenly strange things start happening. After a while, those strange things start increasing, and then circumstances start to change, and suddenly a book falls in my hand, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, hey, this is telling me to do stuff. And, so I eventually built some kind of relationship with this thing that obviously worked better than I did in my life. Good things were starting to happen when I'm talking to this power. When I'm talking to me, I'm getting shit. So I start talking more and more to this power.
So what kind of responses are you getting from your first prayer?
Things just start happening. We call it synchronicity. Suddenly the phone rings. Suddenly somebody tells me, read this book. I started to read this book when I was really at the bottom of my fucking dry misery in my first year or so of sobriety, slowbriety, and I'm miserable, and I'm restless, irritable, and discontent, but I know I got to find a way. I got to find this God thing. I got to find something that works. And somebody tells me, you got to read this book. And I grasped at it because I was so desperate. I was like, anything, give me. And I get this book, and it's called The Artist's Way.
Sure.
And it's by Julia Cameron, who I'd actually seen at meetings here in Hollywood. And I'm in New York, and I start studying The Artist's Way, and I start reading it. And I'm also trying to do a 4-step, because now I've fully agreed to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the power of this God, because I've had an experience in step 2. It's actually, shit's happening, and my life is better when I'm talking to something other than my own shitty brain. So I make this decision again and again, turn my will over to my God, I offer myself to thee, all that. And good things start happening. And I get this book, and I'm like, okay, this is a sign from God. So I start reading this book, and I'm studying it like I'm a good student for the first time in my life. I dropped out of junior high, man, to run the streets. Now I'm a student.
You got really into seeking this answer.
I was obsessed because we're alcoholics. We do everything obsessively. So now I'm doing good shit obsessively, and I'm reading this book, and I'm studying, and I'm following all the directions, because I'm still too proud to have a sponsor, but this becomes my sponsor. God became my sponsor through these circumstances. Now I'm reading this book, and now I'm getting people coming into my life who are sponsoring me. I won't call them sponsors, but I'm taking direction. So I read this book, and suddenly I start journaling like a wild man. I filled fucking suitcases full of journals. And in the process, I started writing books, which is what I wanted to do from the time I was 14 years old, but I never had the honesty to be able to do it. So suddenly I'm in touch with the source. I'm in touch with the higher power, the higher
48
self.
years old, you start writing?
Started writing like a motherfucker. And, I just wrote. And I wrote all these books. And then I rewrote them. And then I rewrote them and wrote them again and again and again. And the next thing you know, I never sought a publisher. The publisher started coming to me. They heard from so-and-so that I had these books. Could I read them? Yeah, you can read them. Yeah, whatever. Oh, this is really good. Can we publish it? I'm like, yeah, go ahead, publish it. All this stuff just started falling into place. And that's when I recognized there is a power in the universe that creates miracles that I can't take credit for. I can say this with true humility, as close as I can come to true humility, that I have become a channel to write great works of fucking modern literature, and I'm not the one saying it. People much greater than me have said it, that these books are fucking like serious contributions to modern literature, like dope literature, like dirty, nasty shit. And I can't take any credit for that except that I was just willing to show up. I channeled something greater than myself. And I'm proud of these books. And the books turned into a movie, and I'm proud of even the fucking movie.
Why shouldn't you be proud of the movie?
Well, because most movies, if they're based on a book, they're not as good.
Did Scab Vendor come from the John Joseph quote, or where does Scab Vendor come from?
No, it came from source, man. I'm just a fucking channel. I was honored and privileged and humbled to be a channel for God's divine intelligence to work through this fucking fucked up, messed up, narcissistic, sick, defeated vessel to create
that was
literature.
You, this fucked up narcissistic
yeah,
vessel.
Me. Yeah, the one that I call me.
Yes.
That little me with the small m, but then there's the higher self, which we call a higher power. I call it my higher self. It lives in all of us.
So you start to find this light in you, this beautiful, sober path. What takes you to...
I ain't walking on water, but...
I didn't say you were walking on water. I said beautiful, sober path. I didn't say walking on water.
I'm still a fucking sick, demented, twisted fuck, but through this crippled vessel, I'm able to channel something from source that is truly, great.
How do you stumble onto this spirit molecule?
So, I'm back in Brazil. I'm in the middle of writing my first book.
Narcissa.
Narcissa. I'm addicted to a fucking crack whore
named Narcissa.
Well, that's a pseudonym, but she's strung out on crack, and I'm strung out on her crack. And
very good. I like that smile.
And we had a really death-defying relationship. She eventually wound up getting sober. So once again, but in this book, it's the darkest journey anybody could imagine, and so I wrote this novel that's loosely based on this relationship I had. It's not a memoir like my other books. It's a novel. I took this twisted, fucked up, dangerous, crazy relationship and turned it into a novel, which is kind of like slapstick tragedy. And the novel, is a dark journey. It's kind of got a happy ending in a weird way, but it's there's nothing really too happy about it. It's just dark. It's dark, but it's also funny. It's kind of like, that's why me and Jerry Stahl, are friends, because it's that kind of really twisted, nasty, slapstick tragedy. And so anyway, I was in that world in the slums of Rio de Janeiro, which makes the slums of like
the Bronx look
like fucking Beverly Hills.
Right.
So I'm living that life, and bullets are flying overhead, and I'm like ducking for cover, and it's all that. Anyway, the book comes out. I'm still crazy. I'm sober. I'm stark raving sober. Maybe I'm 5, 6, 7, 8 years sober, and things are just getting darker and darker. Crazy. And I'm in Brazil, and there's a lot of ayahuasca churches in Brazil, legitimate ones. Oh, that's where it started, the Santo Daime that I belong to. That's like the oldest tradition of ayahuasca religions.
So could you explain a little bit about...
Wait.
You don't let me ask anything.
Because I'm still talking here.
Wait, there's more.
I'm still talking here.
Okay, John.
You ask a question, you got to let me give the answer.
Yes, Jonathan.
All right. I love you, brother.
I love you, too.
All right. So
I'm totally with you.
Just so you know.
I'm totally with you.
We're having a good time.
Yeah.
So I'm in Brazil, and I'm like going to meetings, but I'm not, I'm feeling like, God is with me, but why am I so fucked up? I mean, I'm fucking years sober, and I'm fucking chasing after fucking crack whores, and and I'm not...
Earthly pleasures.
I'm crazy. What the fuck's wrong with me? And so I know there's a lot of Santo Daime, which is what we call the ayahuasca church that I belong to, where I got indoctrinated or whatever into, and that's around. And there was one day I'm walking down the street in my neighborhood, and there's this guy that I used to see all the time. He was like this French guy, real tall and sort of awkward looking. And everywhere I would see him, he was always walking with this other guy who was like an Amazon Indian, with like full, the haircut and everything. And I'm like, wow, these are an odd couple, and they're always together. But I kind of knew the guy through other people, so I stop on the street and we're talking, and the Amazon guy, the indigenous guy, and this weird French dude, and I was like, so what are you doing? How you doing? Where are you going? Oh, we're going to do an ayahuasca ceremony. Would you like to come? And I was like, yeah.
You
Okay.
didn't get scared you were blowing your sobriety?
Well, that's why I'd avoided it for so long, because I was afraid that it was going to freak me out like acid, and then I'd have to drink again just to come
Mellow
down
out,
off
yeah.
it, So I was scared for years, because I'd been around it for years, and everybody I knew, a lot of people I knew were in it, and they were always like, hey, you should come. It's good for you. And I was like, so I was scared. So I never did it. And but this one time I was just at a desperation point. I was sober for quite a while. I was on a spiritual quest, and nothing seemed to be working out too good, even though maybe it was. I just didn't feel it. So these guys, they invited me to go to this ceremony, and I said, okay. And I just went. I was just like, basically the mentality at the time was, what do I got to lose? I'm not good. I'm depressed. I'm confused. I'm scared, and I was like, they say this is a spiritual thing. And at this point, I'm just like, what I got to lose? Oh, I forgot I left out a part. I'd actually gone to a ceremony months before.
Observing it.
I used to go to the ceremonies and observe. But then I went to one months before, and I got up the courage to drink the tea. And so I went up to where they were serving it, and they handed me the little glass, and I drank it, and I'm waiting to see God and all this shit. Nothing happened. I didn't feel anything, and so I went outside and sat under a tree, and I was really pissed. So this time, and then I was like,
how could that happen?
It can happen. Because now, looking back many years later, I could look back and I could say it happened because the medicine, the spirit of the medicine.
Did you hear that boom when you said spirit?
I did. Yes, I did. Yeah, the spirit of the medicine was preparing me gently. Or maybe, it was preparing me. It was there. The spirit's always there. The spirit's here now. And anyway, the spirit of the medicine was preparing me for what was to come. I didn't know that at the time. I was just pissed. So the next time I see these guys, I'd already tried it once and it didn't work. So I was like, what do I got to lose? So these guys, I follow them to the place, and when we get to the place, there's a line where they're serving the tea, and I get in line, and when I get up to the guy who's serving the tea, he gives me a little, like a couple fingers in a glass, and I looked at him and I said,
that's not going to do it.
I said, fill the cup. And he looked at me like, and I was like, I remember the words came out of my mouth. I said, I want a warrior dose. I don't know where that came from, but he filled the cup, and I drank this stuff, and it tastes like fucking like ass. And I gulp, 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 gulp. I mean, I must have drunk 5 times what the average serving is for the tea. And next thing you know, I'm on my fucking hands and knees on the floor, puking my fucking guts out and begging, God help me. Again, that prayer. God help me. God help me. God help me. God help me. Only sincere prayer I'd ever said is the one that got me sober. God help me. And suddenly I heard this voice. This you saw in the movie. I heard this voice booming inside my head, but also all around me. I hear this booming voice, and it's saying in Portuguese, because that's what we speak in Brazil, and the voice is saying, Tu não tá aqui para pedir ajuda. It's saying, you're not here to beg for help. You're not here to beg for mercy. You're here to help suffering spirits. So get on your feet and let's get to work. And like suddenly I was like literally shot to my feet by a force not my own. And with a this shout came out of my mouth that wasn't mine. It was that being that occupied my body. It was an indigenous warrior. I saw it and I felt it. And it was in me, and it just went, and I jumped up on my feet and started just walking around in circles. And I suddenly, all these fucking spirits, dead junkies and suffering spirits, tormented in the fucking depths of purgatory, were like flying into the light through my body, and suddenly
leaving you.
They were using me as a bridge to get out of their suffering. And I was, at the end of this night, I was just broken physically. And I just whispered to the universe, I said, thank you for letting me be of service. And I said, I'm going to have to follow this path.
How long does it last?
Well, depends on the
on
type
the warrior's
of ceremony.
dose.
Well, the whole ceremony probably lasted about 6 hours, but then I went and did a second dose because they usually serve 2 or 3 times in a ceremony. But the second time, it was like I was already with my spirit guide, this entity that, was with me.
And since then, how often have you taken ayahuasca?
Well, I did a sort of, I guess you could call a estagio, apprenticeship in the Amazon, where I stayed for a couple months and drank the medicine every day, all day for a couple months, and really went deep into the study. And then I come back to the States and joined with the community here.
How similar is it to a psychedelic experience?
I don't know.
You did a lot of psychedelics.
But you can't compare that, because I was a kid seeking kicks and relief from my mental turmoil when I was a kid. This is a different deal. This is like a grown-ass man seeking, what does it say in the 11th step? Seeking to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. That's the difference. If you're doing that, or you're trying to go out to fucking clubs and,
My question is this, though, and I don't have an answer. I'm just asking this question. If you're a sober person and you're seeking that answer through LSD or through mushrooms,
but I wasn't.
I'm just asking you.
Oh, what's the effect like?
What's the difference? Like, it's like
I can't say. You know why I can't say?
Because you haven't done it.
Because I never did LSD seeking to, work on my 11th step commitment. I've only done ayahuasca. I don't smoke weed. I don't do mushrooms.
Did you ever take Ibogaine?
Once. That was kind of what set me on this path in the first place. Because I did the 2 experiences in Brazil. The one time when I didn't feel anything, the second time when I got the fucking full message, but then I never did it again. Then I came back to the States, and I was married to like another crack whore. And at this time I was probably about 10, 12 years sober, and I was married to a crazy person again. I didn't realize that I sort of realized that I was marrying my mother again and again and again. The mother wound was coming to the surface through me marrying crazy women like my mother. It's an old pattern. It goes back, my father, it probably goes back, hundreds of generations. Who knows? But I was living that out, and I was miserable. And then somebody mentioned Iboga. That's the real name for it. Why do they call it Ibogaine? I'll tell you why they called it Ibogaine. Because there was some smartass that was trying to get this stuff legalized, pharmaceutically backed, and they were going to use it as a miracle drug
heroin
to,
cure.
Cure heroin addiction, right? Anyway, but I was interested in doing this thing, and so I found some people in Mexico over the border that were doing it.
Iboga treatment.
Yeah, but it
Iboga
wasn't a clinic. It was actually just a couple people that I knew through other people, and they were like, yeah, we'll put you in a motel room for a couple days by the beach, and you can do this, and we'll watch after you for a couple days because you'll be out of your body for 2 whole 48 hours. maybe a little longer. And I was like, let's go. So I did that. And that was out of the body. For time and space were irrelevant. And I was in the spirit realm for a couple of days, years, lifetimes. Went through past lives, future lives, other dimensions, spirits, crazy shit, and roller coaster ride through the astral plane. I mean, on a level that I've never experienced before or after. This ain't ayahuasca. This is the master,
The Iboga.
They call it the Stern General. Where it comes from in Africa, it's referred to as the Stern General. Ayahuasca is the mother. Ayahuasca is the mother.
And Iboga?
Iboga is the Stern General. It's the father. It's hard. But
I took it once.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
So you know.
I don't know what you know. What are you going to ask me though?
Did you see the television sets folding like a deck of cards on the left and the right, and on the like I went on this roller coaster ride, and on one side was a flat screen television just folding one after the other like decks of cards, and on the other side was the same thing folding like decks of cards, and on this side you could see all the events of your life from the time of birth up to the present, but minute by minute by minute by minute, every event, every thought, every person, everything, every happening, like decks of cards just going down, 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 and you're like, whoa! And then on the other side, the other row of flat screen televisions going down, 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 is events of the universe, planets being born and exploding and dying, and the earth being formed, and the civilizations coming and going, and that was just the very beginning.
Why didn't you do that one again?
Because I think I didn't need to, and I also
didn't want to.
Heard it said, well, maybe didn't want to, but didn't need to somehow, because I heard it said somewhere that in the tribe in Gabon, where this stuff comes from, there's a Bwiti tribe that actually uses that as a rite of passage for every warrior. And in that rite of passage, they're only supposed to do it once in their life. They only do it once. You're not supposed to do it more than once, because if it could kill you.
Right.
And you have to sign a contract with the medicine before you take it that you will come back, because the people that are holding space for you don't want to be stuck with a fucking corpse, because at one point you do have the option to go further, and you sign a contract saying I'm going to come back to this body, I promise, and you sign that. So there's that.
I have a stupid question. Okay. As a devout AA.
Oh.
Yes, what?
Wait.
Yes.
Hold that question.
Yes.
I'll get back to you.
Yes.
There's more.
Wait, there's more.
There's more. So in this experience, in the middle of this experience, all this stuff happened. I can't go into everything because it'd be here till midnight. But this one thing in the experience was, before I went into the experience, they told me, write down, whatever questions you want to ask the master teacher here, and write down and put a little altar with some of your favorite things, and then light a candle, and then put your list of questions there, in whatever language you want, and just mentalize that. When you go into this thing, you're going into it with an intention. So I said, I want to know about my ancestors. I want to understand the ancestral curse, because my maternal grandfather was a gypsy, and a crazy fucking alcoholic criminal gypsy, Romani. So I have that blood in me, and other bloods. My father was like half a Jew. My mother was basically gypsy, or of gypsy heritage. So
I think that was Dr. Doom's lineage too.
And they were all Russian. So anyway, I signed this thing, and I wrote, and then I'm like, okay, I want to know about my ancestral lineage, the curse, because in my family, alcoholic family, nobody ever talks about nothing, So I go into the ceremony, and I'm out. I'm traveling through the astral, go to all these different places, dimensions, this and that. And then at some point, I could sense the presence of the Stern General, the Iboga, the entity of the Iboga. And I said, I want to know about my ancestors. And he says to me, the voice says to me, and as he's saying this to me, I see a train car going by, a whole lot of boxcars going by. They're all painted flat black, and they've got skulls and crossbones on every car, and they're piled up with bodies. And as that thing's going past me, the voice says, let the dead worry about the dead. You're here to help the living. And as it was said, that's what I saw. And then there was a lot of other stuff that went on, blah, blah, blah. I come out of the thing days later, and I'm back in the, my body, and these guys are like, feeding me, watermelon and juices and stuff. Good job, you did it, And I'm sitting there talking with these guys, and the guy says to me, I didn't know you spoke Russian.
Wow.
And I said, well, I don't speak Russian. I must have been speaking Portuguese. You probably thought it was Russian. He's like, no. My parents were both Russian. I grew up hearing Russian. You were speaking Russian. I don't speak it so well, but I know the words, and you were speaking Russian for hours. I'm like, what? The question I'd asked the plant, the teacher, was tell me about my ancestry. My ancestry is Russian. I don't speak Russian. I was speaking Russian for hours. And that's happened other times too.
And it reminds me of, like, you talked about Jung and, like, the collective unconscious and how it touches itself, right?
Dude, it's crazy, huh?
Yeah, it's crazy. That is crazy. Now, as a devout AA, somebody who's sober as the day is long, you've stumbled into these molecules, substances that offer a glimpse into the infinite. How does it work with 12-step?
I've never talked about this anywhere I think this is probably the first time I've ever, I'm real free with my stories. My life is literally a bunch of open books to anybody. I got no secrets, because I don't want to be sick as my secrets, so I try not to have any.
Right.
But I've never talked about this openly because there's so much misconceptions about this. People think it's a drug. People think you're getting high. People think you got to trade in your sobriety date. Let them think what they want. It's like
not up to them.
They don't know. And, contempt prior to investigation is a real plague. In AA, there's a lot of untreated people in AA. There's a lot of people that are, loitering with the attempt to recover. And God bless them. My hat's off to them. But, there's so much more, like going to AA and, following a real, diligent spiritual quest. I mean, it ain't going to make no saints out of us. But, if we don't at least do that, at least if I don't do that, with a certain fervor, then it would be like, going to fucking Disneyland and not going on any rides, It's like, what am I doing here,
Well, the only thing in AA is spiritual principles and service, and it sounds like all you got from Mother Ayahuasca or the Stern General is how can you help the living?
Well, but I had a foundation in AA before I would dare to mess with any of these.
But do you think that it was your foundation that had these molecules speaking to you in the language of AA?
Of course.
That's amazing.
Well, because it's only one source. There's many, many different paths to source. We call it God just because it's a simple one-syllable word, that rolls off the tongue pretty easy. But there's so much nasty baggage attached to that word because of religions that people are like, oh, I don't like this God stuff, So we could call it whatever, That's why AA is so beautiful. It's anarchistic, and you can you say power greater than yourself, as we understood God. God as we understood him. It doesn't have to be a him. It doesn't have to be a her. It doesn't have to be an it. God as we understood it. How did we understood it? Past tense. It's not God as we understand God.
So what does that mean, God as we understood it
I'll
versus
tell you right
understand?
now, my conception of it is I can't understand God. God is inconceivable to this fucking puny monkey-ass brain of mine. I can't understand God. How could I possibly understand God? How could an ant crawling under my shoe understand me? It's impossible. I can't understand God, but I could have an understanding of God.
And that understanding becomes understood.
Understooding, because understood is in past. What does it say? It says, made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood God. Where did I understood God? I understood God from a relationship I built with this thing, this pie in the sky, this power, through a relation, an experiential relationship that takes place in the principle of step 2. Seeking. God could and would if he were sought. So where do I start seeking God? Well, I admitted powerlessness. My life sucks.
What is
drunk
step
or
2?
sober.
Step 2 is made
Came
to believe
to
that power over
believe. It
yourself
doesn't
is-
say we believed.
Came to believe.
It
That's my
didn't-
favorite. That's my favorite because it's like, as the bullshitter, I could always come to believe. I don't need to believe. It's like, you know,
Well-
and the decision's even better for the bullshitter.
But
Because
that's-
how many decisions have I made and not actually gone through with?
Right.
I can make the decision.
Make a decision. But step 2 says came to believe. It doesn't say we believed.
Right.
And
I'm
it
with you.
doesn't say, it also doesn't say we came to believe in a power.
Came to believe that a power
It's
was
not
greater than
saying
ourselves
it's
could
not
restore us
saying
to
we
sanity.
believed in God. It doesn't say we believed in God. It says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves.
What do you think that language is about?
It's very precise. I believe that the fucking AA literature is divinely inspired because it's so fucking perfect. Even though it's, archaic and people are like, what's a pinch hitter,
Right.
whatever. But at the core of it, it is so perfect. There's no loopholes. There's no way around it. It's like written by the greatest lawyer in the universe. There's no way to finagle this shit. It's precise. It's like fucking precise, man.
And in our thing last night, Bob Forrest was talking about Bill Wilson's acid trips or whatever, and I mentioned that he had gotten sober under the belladonna thing, and how psychedelic is belladonna, and how psychedelically adjacent is AA to psychedelia.
Well, I can say from personal
That
experience.
was the worst question I've ever asked. How psychedelic is AA adjacent to psychedelia?
I like that.
Thank you.
Well, personal experience, that's all I can really share, is that the most psychedelic experience of my life, and this is before I ever worked with plant medicines, it's before I ever worked with ayahuasca ceremony, before any of that, just in my early sobriety, right up to the point and beyond where, I actually worked with what we call, psychedelic medicines. But the most psychedelic experience of my life is being sober under the 12 steps of all these 12-step programs. Because psychedelic, if you look it up in the dictionary, I believe it says mind expanding. And there ain't nothing more mind expanding than going through the 12-step process.
And who would you suggest?
Hurts.
This is going to be a difficult question. Would you suggest, or who would you suggest would benefit from this?
I don't suggest.
Okay.
I don't invite, and I don't proselytize, and I don't do any of that shit.
But you
because
serve seekers.
if somebody, it's like I don't hide my involvement with AA, and I don't hide my involvement with any other spiritual process that I'm involved with. But at the same time, I don't invite anybody because, and I asked my padrino in Brazil one time, one of my mentors in this, and I said, Padrino, this is so good for us. It helps us grow and evolve and makes us more loving people and more tolerant, and it just helps me with my 12-step program, and it's just so good for me. Why can't I invite the people that I love to partake in this? Because we have a tradition, we do not invite. And I asked him, why can't I invite the people I love that could get so much benefit from this? And he just said to me, did anybody invite you, or were you called? And I was like, yeah, I was called. And he said, that's because the divine does not offer itself. You have to come knocking. And that sounded like a pretty good explanation to me.
I think it sounds good to me,
So
too.
I try to live by that.
Listen, I really, 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 really have enjoyed this conversation.
Well, I really, 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 really enjoy conversing with you, my friend.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
What was Hunter S. Thompson like?
I've had conversations all night long, conversations that started at 8 o'clock at night and went till 10 the next morning with Johnny Depp, who was very close with Hunter
I
Thompson.
thought you didn't want to talk about Johnny.
I'm not going to talk about,
I'm just playing.
the stuff that like fans want to know, but this is real shit. Johnny was very, very close with Hunter, and Johnny sees Hunter as one of his great mentors and father figures and brothers, and just deep, deep love. Like Hunter is like a soulmate to Johnny. And so what I could tell you about Hunter Thompson is just what I know from his writing and from like the stories that Johnny tells with such love and admiration for this great man. And I only met Hunter once, and that was a story where
Did you inhale ether with him?
no,
Oh, well.
no, I never took drugs with Hunter or drank with Hunter, but I actually published this story. There's a book called Who Killed Hunter S. Thompson, and it's a bunch of stories about Hunter, written by acquaintances and friends of Hunter, about stories that their interactions with Hunter. And I had a story in there where I was supposed to meet Johnny and Hunter in a hotel room in New York City right before Fear and Loathing came out. They were there doing press for the movie, and they were in this hotel room in New York City. They were locked up in this hotel room doing God knows what.
Inhaling ether, I hope.
I don't know. I wasn't there.
I hope they were inhaling
So,
on rags.
so they called me to go to the hotel room and meet Hunter. So on the way to the meeting, I stopped at the 25th Street Flea Market in New York.
That's right where I grew up.
And I was walking through the flea market, and I ran into this fucking guy, this biker that I knew.
Was it Sonny Barger?
No. Come on, man.
I'm just having fun.
Come
man.
on,
I'm just
man.
having fun.
Come on. So I walk in the flea market, and I run into this biker guy, and he'd actually tried to hang around with the Hells Angels, but they gave him the boot because he was not HA material. Anyway, but so he used to sell like weird shit at the flea market, like bayonets and Nazi memorabilia. And he comes up to me in the flea market. I'm on my way up to go uptown to meet Johnny and Hunter Thompson in this hotel room, up way the fuck uptown, in nosebleed part of uptown. And I'm on my motorcycle. I stop at the flea market because it's like a Saturday, and I walk around, kill some time. So I go in there, and here comes this biker guy, and he's like, "Hey, JS, come here. I got to show you something. You're really going to dig this." This guy had sold me some very questionable shit in the past. And I'm like, "Yeah, what do you got?" He pulls out this baggie and hands it to me, and I open the baggie, and what looks like dried up cat turds, but actually it's a bunch of fucking fingers, mummified fingers with the fingernail and everything, And I'm like, "What the fuck is this, man?" And he's like, "Some guy brought these back from Vietnam. They're a souvenir. He cut them off some Viet Cong dude." And I'm like, "What do I want with this shit?" And he was like, "Come on, man. You like weird stuff. You could sell it to Joe Coleman and trade him for a painting. I don't know." I'm like, "What do you want for this stuff?" "Give me $50. I said, No fucking way. I'll give you 20. He's like, "Give me 30. So anyway,
you buy the fingers for $30.
Yeah, I buy a baggie full of
A
fingers
mummified
for $30.
fingers, yeah.
I stuff them in my fucking pocket, and I get up back on the bike, and I ride uptown to meet Hunter Thompson and Johnny. So I walk into the lobby of this fancy hotel, and they're looking at me like some kind of rat that just crawled in from the kitchen, and like, who's this greasy old looking biker dude, rolling up on our fancy hotel. And I walk up to the desk, and I'm like, "I'm here to see Johnny Depp and Hunter Thompson." They're, "Oh, yes, sir, right this way." So they call the room. Nobody's answering. I'm like, "Well, they just told me to come up." And, well, sorry, sir, but there's no answer to the room, so you can't go up unannounced, And so if you just have a seat, so I'm sitting there. Time's going by, and I'm sitting there, and I go back to the desk. They try again, no answer, and I'm like, fuck, man, it's bastards. They get me to come all the way up here, and now I'm sitting in a fucking lobby, and everybody's staring at me, and I'm embarrassed, and this sucks. So I wait like an hour, and we try several times. He tries to call the room, nobody answers, and I'm like, bastard. So I'm like, excuse me, sir, could you give me an envelope and a sheet of paper and a pen? So he's like, yes, sir. So I go back to my little waiting spot on the table, and I write a note, and I'm like, I wrote a note, and then I pulled out a finger out of the bag, and I rolled it up in the note and put it back in the envelope, and sealed it, and said, would you please deliver this to Mr. Depp's room or Hunter Thompson's room? And they were like, yes, sir, no problem. And so the note says, thanks for nothing, you bastards. This is a little souvenir from the last guy that left me sitting in a fucking hotel room waiting for hours, and then I got on the bike and left. Anyway, so that story ended up in this book, and Hunter Thompson dedicated a copy of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas to me, and
Nice.
He wrote in there, thanks for looking after the Colonel. That's what he called Johnny. Thanks for looking after the Colonel, but next time, keep your fucking fingers to yourself.
Right? Don't give me the finger anymore.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That was my Hunter Thompson
Jonathan,
experience.
JS, thank you so much for the time. It's
Thank
amazing.
you.
Love
It's
the
an honor to
experience.
be with you,
Love
brother.
the experience.
It's
Fucking
an
cool.
honor, man.
Thanks, man.
I love Dopey. I love all you guys, man. You guys are doing God's work.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.